Thank you. Sorry about that. I will start over. Thank you. Welcome to the January 4th, 2023 regular meeting of the Ann Arbor Planning Commission. For detailed information on meeting procedures, please review the full printed meeting agenda provided. Mr. Leonard, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Sorry, a little rusty after my holiday. Right. Commissioner Gibrandal.
Present.
Commissioner Abrams. Commissioner Sauvé.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt. Commissioner Dish. Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Clark. Commissioner Weich.
Here.
I do want to alert the commission, you have 5 members, which is enough for quorum. It would not be the required 6 votes to take action on a petition. I was expecting a 6th member, so as we progress through the business, hopefully we'll catch up. In the event that we don't get a 6th member, my recommendation would be to hear the presentations, conduct the public hearings on the action items, but to postpone action on those items until the next Planning Commission meeting on January 17th.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Commissioner Sauvé and seconded by Commissioner Lee. Any discussion? None. All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we also we're on to item number 4, which is may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the October 18th, 2022 meeting? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Weich. Any discussion? None. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 Motion carries. All right, we are on to item number 5, which are reports from City Administration, City Council, who we don't have tonight, so perhaps Mr. Leonard can fill us in on that and any other liaisons.
Yeah, no City Council report. In addition to Commissioner Dish being absent, the City Council moved their meetings for January to the 9th and the 23rd, so they have not conducted their January meeting quite yet. As for me, no reports. I will just a brief update. We continue to work with the selection committee on comprehensive plan. We are, at this point, recommending proceeding with the interviewing of 2 firms, Interface Studios and Housel Levine. So we are hoping to get those interviews conducted in January with a recommendation following up after that. So that's the only report I have.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we are now on to public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about an issue that is not listed as a public hearing on this agenda. We'll first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants. To speak during this public hearing, press *9 if listening by phone, or use the raise hand feature if you're viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226, and to unmute, press *6. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. When you hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so that we may hear you clearly. Sure, no problem. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time for any issue not listed on the agenda? Anybody remote? Mr. Leonard.
We do. Caller with the phone number ending with 345. You can press *6 to unmute and address the Planning Commission for 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm a little confused. We can't address on anything that is on the agenda. Is that true?
So what we have places, excuse me, we have places in the agenda for other items. When we're discussing those items, there's an opportunity for public comment for those items. So this one is to kind of the catch-all for things that are not on the agenda.
Okay, can I just ask one question? Did you receive the updated version of the pros plans from PAC, because they made some changes yesterday?
I think we'll get that report when we get to that item on the agenda. Mr. Leonard knows what's going on. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anybody else waiting virtually for us?
Caller with the phone number ending with 534. You can press *6 to unmute your phone and address the Planning Commission for 3 minutes.
Good evening. This is Tom Stolberg calling from Lower Town in Ann Arbor. And I'd like to discuss Lower Town development. It's going to be coming back from Morningside. They're having their community meeting later this month. So to preview that, without giving you all the details, one of their phases was going to be approximately 80 condos that did not do well in pre-sales. They moved that to their third phase, and they're going to change it to apartments, a greater number of units than that, and eliminate the parking, which I believe was some first floor parking, and perhaps a little bit more than just that. The new building is going to have a few units of affordable housing. I'm guessing that has to do with the formula from the brownfield negotiation, but I'm not certain. And the developer wants to keep it all gas service, as his original plans had, and has stated some underground utility work to justify that. However, I am hopeful that this body and other members of the public will convince that developer that it's time to go to electrify that building. And whatever relatively small costs there were for underground utilities, let water under the bridge. We're in a different place right now in terms of planning initiatives. If the developer's been paying attention to planning commission. If we look at Valhalla, for example, Valhalla was 4 times the density that the comprehensive plan called for. Planning staff recommended not approving it for that reason. At Planning Commission, it was approved, I believe largely in part because of the electrification of the building. Morningside's Lower Town project got a density that was even greater than the zoning category that was used at Valhalla. How they got it, that's another story for another day, but it was not appropriate. The current comprehensive plan is the same as it was back then, which called for a mixed-use urban village at that site. There's no mixed use being proposed on this phase. So given that they got a bonus density, they didn't provide the affordable housing that they would have had to provide it had it been approved as a PZ, and that saved them $9 million or 93 units of affordable housing. And given that the comprehensive plan
30 more
is very
seconds.
balanced with today's planning initiatives for sustainability, I hope that everybody can urge this developer to put in some mixed use on that first floor and to build the building sustainably. Let's electrify it. The perfect place to implement our current planning initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the queue?
There is not.
Okay. Could we hear about the public hearings for the next meeting on January 17th?
We have one new public hearing scheduled for January 17th. It is for Fire Station number 4, proposal to replace the existing public fire station located at 2415 South Huron Parkway. The new 2-story fire station is proposed to be 12,000 square feet. 8 off-street parking spaces are proposed, as well as 4 Class C bicycle parking spaces. Most of the surface parking area will be located in Schiffler Park. The project will provide a number of improvements to the park, including a new larger basketball court and a rain garden to capture stormwater. 2 driveways on South Huron Parkway are proposed to handle the movement of fire apparatus and parking space for fire personnel. And several sustainable energy systems are proposed, including geothermal heating and cooling, as well as solar panels. As a reminder for those on the commission, as a public project, projects over $250,000 in value, which this is, per our resolution of City Council, come to the Planning Commission for review and measurement against city private development or standards. So this public hearing and your review will be measuring the plan against the UDC. However, those comments and conclusions will be provided to the City Council and only in an advisory nature.
And I will be recusing myself for that project as I'm one of the designers on it. Okay, we are on to item 8A, which is our regular business. So we'll first be looking at the 2024 through 2029 capital improvements plan. I will hand it over to staff.
Let me introduce Kayla Coleman. Kayla has been with the city longer than I have. I don't know how long. But Kayla has recently stepped into the role of capital improvements planner for the city, a role that was previously held by Deb Goslin, who you saw on many occasions. Deb is probably now enjoying some warm weather with her feet up on a beach somewhere. As we've provided some presentations to you prior on the capital improvement plan, this is what we will call a full capital improvement plan. So it's really opening the books and starting anew, if you will, with both existing projects and brainstorming new projects across a lot of segments. At the initial presentation, there were some questions and comments by the Planning Commission Actually, I don't think there were that many questions or comments. I think I'm conflating the next item on the agenda. But in any event, I'm going to shut up. Kayla's going to go through an overview of the plan, the projects that are going to be featured, the duration of the plan. She's going to also highlight some of the scoring. That was an aspect I think that the commission was interested in, and we've provided a supplementary document to the packet in that regard as well. And with that, Kayla, take it away.
Thank you, Brett, for the gracious introduction. Thank you, Planning Commissioners and Planning Commission Chair, for having me here this evening to present on the fiscal year 24 through 29 capital improvement plan. I'm going to try to make sure I'm speaking into the microphone, so I'm sorry if I'm not looking at you as I'm speaking. I'm going to get started here with just a couple of introductory slides. Thank you for inviting me back in September to share the overview of the CIP process with commissioners. I'm going to recap just a little bit of that for the benefit of the public who may be following along with the consideration of this item tonight. And then we'll get on to some highlights of what's proposed in the current fiscal year 24 through 29 CIP, and we can talk also about those scoring metrics as Mr. Leonard mentioned. So just orienting everyone who may not be familiar with thinking in terms of city fiscal years, we at the city here are currently in FY23 that runs from July 1st of 22 through June 30th of 23. And the CIP that we are currently working on and have proposed here for you this evening to consider is the FY24 through 29 CIP. And that would begin in just a few months. July 1st of 2023 would be the starting point for this proposed plan. And this is a full update, as I believe Mr. Leonard mentioned as well. This full update covers a full 6-year plan, which includes many new projects, modifications to existing projects, reprioritization, and removal of some projects that were determined no longer necessary or relevant. So again, just for orientation, what is a CIP? Why do we need it? This schedule of public service expenditures covers a 6-year period. This planning tool is for large physical improvements that are being made to city infrastructure and assets that provide basic needs in order for the community to function. And this is required by the state of Michigan that this plan be created. The full update cycle that we're doing now for all 6 years, we refer to that as taking place in the even years, and that in this case refers to fall of 2022. So although we're in 23 now in an odd year, we developed staff's time spent working on this took place in fall of 2022, so it was an even year cycle. And a CIP project has a minimum threshold of $100,000 for any physical infrastructure improvements to be included in this plan, and studies that lead to physical projects of at least $50,000 are also included in the plan. The major asset categories are municipal facilities, transportation, and utilities. Of course, there are many subcategories within that, but I'll save us the time and encourage anyone looking for more information on that to refer to the September work session presentation. This overview was covered in detail back in September. I just want to highlight the relationship between the CIP process and the budget cycle. The development of the CIP takes place in the fall. These first couple of steps that staff spent time identifying projects, scoping, scoring based on defined metrics, and then programming. The proposed CIP is now presented here for Planning Commission consideration. There'll be public hearing opportunity tonight, and ultimately, whenever the CIP does become approved, it will be handed off to lead into the city budget cycle. So this is a foundational piece of the city's capital budget, and once projects are approved in the capital budget, they can actually move forward to design and implementation. So the CIP is an essential piece of the process, but projects being approved in the CIP does not guarantee that it will receive funding. There is a next step to city council approval. So now looking more closely at what is included in the 24 through 29 proposed plan. We have about close to $1.2 billion worth of total capital infrastructure investments. When you look at the breakdown of where the dollars are falling most heavily, it's in the city-owned buildings group. And I know Deb Goslin, when she was here a few years ago, highlighted this dramatic shift. The city-owned buildings slice of the pie used to be pretty tiny, but there was, with the affordable housing millage, there was a major effort made to identify opportunities for affordable housing improvements. And out of this $481 million, it's something around $430 million of that is affordable housing projects. The remainder include things like fire stations, parks. Parks are called out separately, but fire stations and other work on city-owned building like here at Larkham City Hall, that would be included in the remainder of that asset group. The water system is our other biggest chunk of our CIP, and of that $276 million, over $100 million of that is the water treatment plant replacement project. So there is a very significant project that is programmed over the next 6 years and continuing beyond in order to entirely replace and revamp that water treatment plant. So that's quite significant. The other pieces, also all smaller slices of the pie, also contain a lot of really significant and important capital projects. Looking at the breakdown by number of projects, we ended up with 500 total projects right on the dot. By coincidence. See if it turns out that way ever again. I doubt it. But so the greatest number of projects is in the water system. And so that was similar to what you see. You saw that one having a large number of dollars. It also has a very great number of projects. Street construction coming in next. As we know, many of our street infrastructure, that asset group requires a lot of investment to maintain and to keep it in better condition. We already have a lot planned there. So some of the highlights of kind of the types of projects that are included or changes that have happened since the last cycle. These items were also included in the memo that was provided to the Planning Commission, but there's been a number of policy direction, new changes that have happened over the last couple of years. This is the first full CIP cycle since the adoption of the Moving Together Toward Vision Zero Transportation Plan. So although we saw that coming when Deb last presented a full CIP in 2020, there were some projects incorporated in anticipation of that, but this was our first full cycle with that component of the comprehensive plan for the city. And the A20 carbon neutrality plan, I believe, was approved the June before, I think it was June of 2020, so just before the last full CIP cycle. However, this being its second go round, there were still opportunities to incorporate additional projects and clarify project scopes based on the city's adoption of that carbon neutrality plan. And of course, this fall, the climate action millage resulted in a couple of new projects being incorporated, as well as a number of projects having identified funding sources where before funding had been uncertain. So projects that may have been floundering or were looking or may have been pushed further out were able to be brought forward and have a real tangible, identifiable funding source. That influenced things I think a couple of the All Ages and Abilities Bike Network project received the climate action millage funding. There was a sidewalk project on Earhart where funding from the climate action millage will go towards that. I believe crosswalk lighting as well. So a number of active transportation items will benefit from that millage. The American Rescue Plan Act also led to some changes to the CIP. Again, in some cases, it was identifying a funding source for projects that were already identified needs. The City Clerk Election Center was also incorporated as a new project in the CIP based on the support of that having Council's commitment to fund that through American Rescue Plan Act. Road bond, Council has approved a road bond that will help to further our investments in our road infrastructure, and that will benefit a couple of specific street projects, but our local street resurfacing project and our capital preventative maintenance programs will benefit from that road bond funding. Project coordination and efficiency is something I wanted to highlight. This is an area that's always emphasized in the CIP process, but this year we really made an effort to look at all of the upcoming street projects and determine whether any correlated utility projects are needed. So at the time when a street is opened up for utility work, that's the most efficient time to make any improvements needed to aging water, storm, or sanitary infrastructure. So there was a really dedicated effort to look for that, for those parallel projects. And on the other hand, I want to highlight that if you're tracking projects and how they had been represented in the CIP previously to how they may be shown in this proposed CIP, you're going to notice many schedule delays, many projects that needed to be pushed further in the CIP cycle, largely because of inflation and limited funding. We've all seen inflation in our own consumer purchases. The impacts to the construction sector are dramatic, and the costs of some projects were increasing by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in some cases. And there simply was not enough money available through the city's revenue sources in order to be able to keep those projects programmed as planned. We will not be able to do as much work with the amount of money that we have because the work costs so much more. We've also seen projects get delayed due to labor shortages, due to supply chain and material shortages as well. We've started utilizing the on-hold project status a little more. It was previously available in the CIP software in Alavance, but this year we looked more closely at projects that had been continuously getting bumped each year, another year back, and tried to think more critically about whether there is a commitment and an identified funding availability to predict that we think the project will move forward in the next 6 years. And in cases where we really feel the funding is uncertain or the commitment's uncertain, those have been moved to on hold. They're still in the CIP. We'll look at them each year as staff go through the CIP cycle and evaluate whether any of those now should come off of hold. But the goal there in putting them on hold was to present to the public and to the planning commissioners a CIP that is more reflective of reality, to try to manage expectations and present something that we think is more tangible. Prioritization metrics. So a little on this. I know we talked about this previously in September. It was an area that the commission was interested in. And we did move forward using our existing prioritization metrics that were established in 2020 when the new Alavance software was adopted. But we do see opportunities to continue improving metrics. And we just want to note that as an area that we'd like to work on over the gap between the next CIP cycle. And I hope that it's something that planning commissioners will participate with us in these discussions. Of course, equity and sustainability are two areas where we want to continue improving how our metrics are defined. There are existing metrics that in many of the asset groups, the metric relates to the percentage of households in poverty in a particular census tract. So it's looking at where that project is expected to take place, what is the percentage of households in poverty, and then that would incorporate into the metric. And while that's valuable, there may be more that we could be looking at or other ways we could be thinking about sustainability and equity. So just wanted to note that those conversations did continue to happen throughout the CIP process with staff, and it's an area that we see opportunity for improvement. While we don't know the answer yet of what those metrics should be, it's really about thinking about what projects are moving forward and are they the projects that will provide the most benefit to the community as a whole, and thinking about the different ways we could measure that and consider it in the process. So another preview of something that's coming soon that I'm pretty excited about is that we've been working with our staff that do geographic information systems, so mapping the CIP projects in a way that the community could spatially interact with the data. So right now and in the past, the CIP has existed as PDFs that are posted to the city webpage. And while we make every attempt to be completely transparent and the information is there, it is hundreds of pages of material that can be kind of daunting to page through and find what you're looking for. We have a draft dashboard that's in development that we believe could roll out hopefully in the next couple of months, but certainly before the next full CIP cycle, to be able to allow the public full interaction with the CIP data, to click on individual polygons, zoom into an area on the map of anywhere in the city where they're interested in seeing what might be planned in that area, and see the details, the project description, the information, and what is coming there. This is another screenshot just showing how once you would click on an individual project, it would pull up some information about that. So we think we have the data available, we have the tools, we're just fine-tuning, cleaning it up, and making sure everything is ready before we push it out publicly, but we are pretty excited about that. So with that overview, I turn it over to commissioners for questions, or maybe it's public hearing first. I'll defer to Mr. Leonard, but I thank you all for your time and look forward to the discussion of the CIP. Thanks.
Thanks, Kayla. That's exciting to hear about the new things that are coming. Okay, we will move on to the public hearing part of this. So this is an opportunity for people to be able to speak about the CIP that we just heard about. We'll first call in individuals present to address the commission, and then remote participants. To speak during this public hearing remotely, press *9 if listening by phone, or use the raise the hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last three digits of your phone number or by name if available for those accessing through the web link. When you hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so that we may hear you clearly. For either method of participation, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anybody present that would like to address the Planning Commission on the capital improvements plan?
Thank you, Sugar Rindle. My name is Ken Garber. I live at 28 Haverhill Court. I commend Ms. Coleman and staff for their hard work on this CIP. I spoke at this hearing the last 2 years running, and both times I asked that network geothermal loops be built into some of these street and sewer projects. So I'm really happy that this CIP includes a district geothermal field feasibility study and a downtown energy utility study, along with the launch of a sustainable energy utility. I'm super pleased with this. Next year, we should see actual plans and budgets for specific district geothermal projects. This is a 5-year CIP. I personally don't see any reason to wait for the outcomes of these studies before budgeting in some of these projects, but that's just pushing me. My other CIP comment is a bit of a rant, sorry in advance. This is about the 720-foot airport runway extension. The airport was designed for piston aircraft, not for jets. But more and more jets and turbojets are using it. In bad weather, they might have to cut back on passengers and payload in order to safely land, or they might have to go elsewhere, hence the longer runway. My question is, why allow jets here in the first place? They're a climate disaster. Private jets are roughly 10 times more energy intensive per passenger than commercial planes, and 50 times more energy intensive per passenger than trains. Football Saturdays see the most jet traffic. Why should we cater to rich alumni just so they can jet in and out on game days? Let them fly commercial. Same for corporate travel. Cargo jets can use Willow Run. Broader context, global aviation emissions are set to triple over the next 30 years, exceeding total emissions over the entire history of flight dating back to the Wright brothers. This is massively unsustainable. Aviation growth is wiping out the benefits of electric vehicles. Almost 2 million more flights a year touch down at U.S. airports than 20 years ago. And it's a tiny fraction of the global population doing the most damage. Most private jet traffic is discretionary. The airport draft environmental assessment cites negligible climate impact, but it only measures emissions at the airport, not in the air. That's like saying a Hummer is climate friendly based just on what it emits in the driveway. Last November, 129 scientists blockaded 11 international airports to demand a ban on private jets. 31 were arrested. This runway extension typifies the way we do transportation in this country. If there is demand for more personal mobility, we automatically meet it with an utter lack of social responsibility. I don't expect you to cut this $6.5 million item tonight from the CIP. Too many people want it, and I'm just one deranged malcontent who doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else present that would like to speak on the capital improvements plan? Do we have anybody in line virtually?
We do not.
Okay, well, I will read the motion and then we can go into discussion. Whereas Section 185 of the Ann Arbor City Code requires that the City Planning Commission annually prepare a capital improvements program identifying public improvements that will be needed within the ensuing 6 years in the general order of priority. Whereas the fiscal year 2024 to 29 capital improvements plan, or CIP, has been drafted by city asset category teams and reviewed by the City Planning Commission. And whereas a duly noticed public hearing on the draft plan was held by the City Planning Commission on January 4th, 2023. Resolved, the City Planning Commission hereby approves the fiscal year 2024-2029 capital improvements plan, and resolved that the City Planning Commission recommends that the City Council approve the fiscal year 2024 through 2029 capital improvements plan as the basis of the fiscal year 2024-2025 capital budget. All right, that's the motion, moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Weich. We are in discussion. Commissioner Mills.
I'll start out by saying I feel like over the last, I don't actually know how many years I've been on Planning Commission, 7 or 8. Whenever the CIP came forward, we would compliment Ms. Goslin. That continues on. I am so excited about the staff that we have in helping see us through this process. I really, really appreciate all of the attachments that you included in the staff report, helping lay out. It was really clear to follow kind of what the new projects are, the list of, I like the on hold. That has perpetually been something that has been like, this is so weird. We have all of these projects that all just get pushed off to the last year. And so having that category, I think, is really, really helpful. I really appreciate the thought given to incorporating the policy context that you were talking about. And I mean, that may have happened anyway, but just seeing the slide of all of the things that do affect kind of what the funding situation is, what gets added to the list, I think is really great. So thank you very much. I have maybe, I think, 2 questions. One is included in the packet for tonight was a memo to us from the Transportation Commission and their recommendations. And I'm curious if you could help us understand how, whether that has been addressed in the draft that we're seeing. I didn't go point by point, but if not, if we could talk about why not.
Of course. Thank you. Is it okay if I address the question?
Please, yes.
Sure. Thank you. And that is probably an oversight on my end for not addressing that earlier, so I apologize. But the Transportation Commission recommendations that have been provided to you have been incorporated. I'm pulling them up right now just to skim through them so I can address them more specifically. But staff from myself, staff from the transportation that support the Transportation Commission and transportation commissioners have met to review these and discuss how modifications could be made to the CIP. And I believe that all of them have been addressed. All of the ones that are relevant to the CIP, their recommendations actually spanned beyond just the capital improvement plan, and really some of these had to do with project implementation and budgeting. And so those ones, I will say, they are within that same document, but they're sort of for a later process. But looking at the first section that have to do with capital improvement plan projects, we did incorporate the language about the desire for permanent physical protection, curbs and bollards. So there's a specific project in the CIP for the All Ages and Abilities Bicycle Network, and that scope has been modified to reflect the language proposed by the Transportation Commission. The State Street, let me see, and the implementation of projects from the State Street corridor, new projects should be added to reflect non-motorized connections. So the way that those were incorporated is that there are existing projects in the CIP for the street construction component, and we added scope items to note the non-motorized connections also needed as a component of that project. So those are reflected. And the final one, I believe, was incorporate. I don't have the project number on the top of my head, but I believe there's an existing CIP project that reflected that Bandimere to Gallup Park location that we may have made a modification. I can look at that one in a little more detail, but I believe that it was a modification to the scope to reflect the commission's requests there. And then the remainder of the recommendations were really about, as I said, like the implementation or the budgeting and not necessarily the CIP. So those have been incorporated. They were provided here for the commission. So it was a comprehensive packet of all the recommendations and discussion that's taken place around the CIP.
Given that it was dated September, I assumed, I just wanted that opportunity to say, is this still something that we should be discussing? So thank you very much for that. I think that's all I have right now.
Commissioner Weich.
Thanks for this presentation and report. I had 2 questions, and I think I'll do the 2. Thanking Commissioner Mills for bringing up the Transportation Commission memo, because that was going to be 1, so I would have had 3. On slide 6 of your presentation, which you gave to us and is in the staff report, I just have a general question of why there's no indication that 430 million of the 481 million is for affordable housing, and why it's being labeled. I understand why it's being labeled because it is city-owned, but just on the surface, it seems like we're doing a lot in city-owned buildings that sort of supports the city services as opposed to affordable housing, which sort of fits some other objectives. So I just wonder, from a policy or a preference, like why that's noted that way in your presentation.
Sure. So the way that the CIP is set up is by asset groups, and it's meant to group like projects that have similar characteristics together. And so city-owned buildings is an entire asset group. And within that, that's where affordable housing projects are classified. And it's one of those things, I'm hesitant because it sounds like I'm going to say, well, we're doing it that way because we've always done it that way. But the reality is that those asset groups have been in place for I think, decades. I think we certainly can modify them. There's no reason why we could not, but those asset groups have been in place for a very long time. The influx of money towards affordable housing is recent.
Sure.
And so in the past, that was a small sliver, and I suspect in the past, the breakdown of that sliver of how much was fire stations versus municipal facilities like the one we're in today versus affordable housing, it was probably more comparable, and right now it's really inflated. I have no problem at all adding an asterisk to call out that, and that's why I wanted to say it during the presentation, is because I think it does misrepresent the data a little bit, or it could lead to some confusion about, why are city-owned buildings getting $481 million? Well, that's specifically because 430-ish of that is affordable housing. I'd be happy to add that note to the slide and provide it to planning staff to replace or supplement what's in Legistar, if that would be helpful.
I think so. I just think in terms of the general public, it's something that's easily missed, that there's those significant investments. And in particular, that $200 million is to one development, the 309 South Ashley development, which is a significant investment in bringing affordable housing there. It even exceeds the allocation that is for the Y lot. So a lot of people are aware of the development that's happening there. I'm not as sure that they're aware of what's coming to Ashley and the allocation that we have in this budget to forecast that. And I just think in terms of communication and trying to cut through some of the communication for the general public, it would just be helpful to see that there is a significant investment in affordable housing. We hear at this table about affordable housing almost every time we hear about a development. So it would be helpful to know, wait, look, the city is investing almost $500 million in its 5-year capital plan in affordable housing.
Sure.
So I would love to see that. So thank you for being gracious there. And then I just have a general question, which I couldn't find the answer to, so you may know, or Mr. Leonard may know. Is bike infrastructure included in the road bond funding?
I do not believe that bike infrastructure is included in the road bond funding. I would have to say that with certainty. I would want to follow up with other staff or to see,
I don't know the answer to that. My understanding of the road bond was that it wasn't an intention to change the source and uses of those funds, but it was a method of sort of front-loading that. So my understanding is that the splits would be the same, but I don't know if there was an intention to replicate the same, for example, for bike infrastructure, if that's tracked in our active transportation asset group separately.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain, because we did make note in the CIP project descriptions where road bond funding was contributing to particular projects. And the local street resurfacing program received an influx of road bond funding. That wouldn't impact bike infrastructure particularly because a local street typically does not have marked bike lanes or bike facilities that are separate from just what's available on street. So I'm thinking no in terms of the local street resurfacing program. Capital preventative maintenance is going to be things like crack sealing and patching that is not specific to bike infrastructure. The only place I'm wondering, there's a couple of specific capital projects, and one of them is the Earhart Road resurfacing, that those street projects may include bike facility improvements. That in that case, it sort of is funding bike. If that road bond money is going towards that project cost as a whole, and part of that project is making bike improvements, which I'd have to pull up the scope to see it, because there are 500 of these, I lose track of what's included in each one of them. That's the only one I can think of that it could be. But I think, as Mr. Leonard said, it was really about front-loading the road money for really street-focused projects, not active transportation.
So just a couple follow-up questions then. So one, can you clarify whether there is a prohibition of the road bond funding for bike infrastructure where that infrastructure is on the road? So I'm not talking about sidewalk or separate facility. I'm talking about protect it, so you're going to resurface a road, restripe the road. When that occurs, does the bike infrastructure fit within that, or does the city have to allocate additional funds outside of the road bond funding in order to do that restriping? And if the city were to put in protected infrastructure, like bollards or other separations, would those be considered inside the road bond funding, or are those outside? So that's just like a general question, because I'm just trying to understand sort of the funding that we're allocating for roads, but then, or for infrastructure, but really it's just car infrastructure. It's not a multimodal infrastructure. And then if there is no, is it a restriction of the bond? Or is it a restriction from the state on how those bonds can be used? Because I know the state has some say in dictating how local municipalities are able to utilize some of those bond fundings for those kinds of projects. And so I'm just trying to understand how, like, what the horizon is for how we can achieve more of our goals of creating infrastructure that supports some of the 820 goals, and how that fits within the capital plan. Because within the plan, you've identified 5 miles per year. I wonder what it would look like if we reversed it and we only allocated 5 miles per year to cars, and then we put the rest of that infrastructure to bikes, how things might improve the infrastructure for us to use the roadways outside of the use of cars. So just trying to understand how this works within our structure, and especially since it's a bond that has to go before the voters. Are there restrictions that come from the state, or is this just, as you indicated earlier, maybe just the way we've been doing things? So
Certainly.
anything you can say to that? I don't know that you were prepared to give me a complete answer for that, so I don't expect one at this time.
Well, thank you, Commissioner White. I think probably best I take that one back and I can relay a response to Mr. Leonard to provide to the Planning Commission. The only additional piece I can comment, I was able to pull up the scope for Earhart resurfacing, which is specifically noted in the scope description as including road bond funding. It doesn't say exclusively funded by road bond, but it does also include bike lanes as part of that project scope. So that's one where we could try to drill in to see. It sounds like there may be other project funding sources, so it's possible that all the road work is being funded by the road work that is for cars, for pavement condition improvement, maybe is being funded by road bond, and there could be other funding sources that are supporting the bike lane work. I'm not sure, but I will look into that as an example and drill into those questions more about any regulations on or prohibitions on how the bond funding can be used.
Yeah, and I think as I was listening to your response, and thank you, I wonder if there are intentional decisions by staff not to include bike infrastructure in the designs that utilize road bond funding. So I'm just like, where does it start? Does it start because the state says you can only do this for cars, you cannot do this for bikes? Is it coming from the policymaker side? So the city council is saying, we need to resurface these roads because they're in poor condition. We don't really care about the bike infrastructure. Or is it coming from somewhere else, such that, as if I heard you correctly, as you are looking at projects that resurface roads, you're also looking at utility upgrades, you're also looking at potential easements and things like that. Well, where does bike infrastructure sit in that? Does it have a seat at that table at the time that that planning gets done, so that it could be included if there is no state prohibition of using those funds to expand it? And my goal, so like, why is he like on this thing, is to get more bike infrastructure that exceeds 5 miles per annum.
Sure.
So, thank you.
You finished? Go ahead, Commissioner Sauvé.
kudos to all that. I'm going to ask you a really maybe mundane one about, like, it's really helpful to see all the on hold pieces. Within the water, there's a lot noted as on hold until road resurfacing. And maybe this is just like, it's a logistical question about how scoring happens. And like, if putting them on hold is part of the scoring system, or was it kind of a qualitative decision that it was the one piece without the other?
An updated evaluation of the scoring metrics, and the case isn't that we determined these projects scored low, let's put them on hold. There was usually some other factor of why it went on hold. And in those water projects, so we talked about the efficiency of if you're opening up the road because the pavement needs to be resurfaced, that's a great time to replace or improve the water infrastructure. And a number of water projects, we have identified needs. Our infrastructure is aging. We know that when the road gets done, we want to improve the water infrastructure, but it would be very costly to the water fund to do it ahead of the road needing improvement, because then the street millage isn't going to contribute. So if we look at the PASER rating of the street, so that PASER rating has to do with pavement condition. And if the pavement condition is high enough, that it's in good enough condition, then the engineers would discuss and determine that that's not a really good eligible use of street millage dollars. We have greater needs out there to put that street millage money towards. And so then the water system would say, well, we don't want to pay to do all the road work and the water work, so let's put it on hold and wait until, if we can, sometimes there's a greater need, and projects have stayed in the plan if there was a water quality issue or some greater identified reason why that water project really needs to move forward, then the water system will sometimes pay for the road work. But in many of the cases, it's not that there's any great problems happening right now. There may have been a water main break here or there, but proactively, we know the infrastructure is getting old. We want to take advantage of the first opportunity we get, so we're tracking it so that when the pavement condition deteriorates enough, we'll be ready to do that water project and that road project together.
Great. Maybe following back on the conversation of, I think what we're seeing is so many of our projects are now double dipping, right? Finding the efficiency in that between housing and millages, like complete street roads and things like that. And so it would be really nice to, I think we're all kind of open to a conversation around like what those categories are and how much interplay there is in like future scoring. Because I think that there's kind of complementary priorities or, frictions within those two. But I really, really appreciate the work, and I'm really excited about the maps.
Great.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lee.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll voice everybody else's comments. That very excellent presentation. Is very thorough. Thank you. One thing quick on the CIP metrics that you sent us makes reference to the master plan, so we should just get it corrected to comprehensive plan. Procedurally speaking, just a quick question. So we pass this as Planning Commission, and then basically City Council will refer to this as they're going through like the municipal budgeting process. Is that correct? Okay, got it. Sounds good. So this is still a required element of, we need to make sure that this goes through. One of the questions I had was, is there any coordination with the university as far as getting feedback from them? I'm sure one of the metrics was on cost sharing. So just wanted to kind of get some feedback as to, I know that they're working on their 10-year vision as well as their 12-month planning process. So what kind of coordination and interplay is there?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, 'cause that's another thing I probably could have highlighted as well. But so the CIP process, in addition to over 70 staff across the organization that are included in those meetings, we include community partners and funding partners such as the University of Michigan, and they're invited to participate in the discussions for all of the asset groups.
Okay.
So they participate in many of them. I think there could be a couple that they find not particularly relevant or necessary, but they're at the table for discussions on particularly things like our utility systems, our road systems, active transportation, things like that, where there could be overlap with work, bridges, where there's been funding partnership recently. As an example, the university is there at the table. They're invited to the meetings that our staff hold as well.
Okay.
And I've provided the report of the proposed CIP to university staff to see how things shake out, what's programmed and proposed, so that they can be conscious of that in their planning as well.
Gotcha. That's really helpful. Thank you. Open spaces and park acquisition, looks like we spent, quite some money this prior year, and we got $2 million, I think, allocated. Can you just kind of, from a budgeting standpoint, is that city council really is the one that's making the determination as to how that fund is spent?
That is one, I have to admit, I don't have a whole lot of background on the open space acquisition. It's one that is a pretty standard, I'm trying to pull it up here in our system to see
Yeah.
if I can find anything. It's been pretty standard, I think. Oh, it looks like the Greenbelt millage went into effect in 2003, extending funding for 30 years. So I think it's based on the millage that has a consistent funding amount broken down.
Okay, got it. The number just kind of stood out to me. It's $44 million in the prior year and $60 million. So I was like, oh, okay, how is that?
I happen to have the parks director on a first name basis and have invited him
great.
if he would like to address that as well. Josh, did you hear the question? Would you like it repeated?
Yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much understand. And Kayla did an excellent job with that in regards to it is based on the 30-year millage. Roughly about $2 million per year is budgeted for acquisitions for the Greenbelt and parkland acquisitions. And then based on what we need to do per year is how we look at that. So there's obviously cost of properties these days is going up, but Remy Long and the staff associated with that do a great job of identifying what those dollars are and how we can best utilize them. And they roll over from year to year. So so within the Greenbelt millage, as well as the parkland acquisition, there are funds available for when properties do come about, because trying to find a decent sized property in Ann Arbor these days is going to be a little bit more than $2 million a year. So that's how it gets put in there, just more as a placeholder so that it gets done based on the millage. So.
Gotcha. Wow. There it is. Thank you.
Off you go, Josh.
Yeah. That was excellent. Impeccable timing. Last question I have, coordination with new zoning efforts. As far as coordinating, we've talked a lot about coordinating transportation use with land use planning. And so are there, I'm taking a look at also what the Transportation Commission, I serve on the Transportation Commission, so I had feedback into that. But just making sure that they are reflected in this plan. So are there efforts, I know, I'm speaking predominantly to TC1 in whether it's Stadium, State Eisenhower, are those kinds of efforts kind of reflected in this plan? I was just taking a look here to make sure that, are there coordinations in that effort? And is that an element that's weighted here in the CIP metrics?
Sure. Well, we do have an asset group for transit, and we, this year, for the first time, actually brought staff from the RIDE into the conversations so that we could ensure coordination with what the RIDE is planning for, and that ensure that's reflected accurately in the CIP. I can't recall any specific discussions in relation to the TC1 zoning, and it could have just been timing in relation to when that was moving forward and the CIP meetings were taking place, but looks like Mr. Leonard may be able to help out here.
Yeah, I don't think this CIP addresses TC1, but it's a conversation that we're starting with staff. Outside of the CIP, one of the things that is happening is public services staff are starting some modeling and some scenarios for upgrading sort of our overall capacity of things like our water treatment plant and the like. And part of that conversation is going to have to be the city really doing some scenario planning. What is it going to look like? There's probably different ways that we could approach that. Obviously, what is our horizon for population? What is our horizon for capacity? I don't know those answers. I don't think that it is not going to be without challenges. Land use, I would say from a planning perspective, we've been pretty fortunate that we've had the capacity to address the development that both the private sector and Planning Commission, City Council have approved. I don't know that is ever always going to be the case without some significant upgrades to our infrastructure. And so you are seeing some of that, the things we know in the CIP with the infrastructure we know, but I don't know that that answers sort of the horizon goals of what is the city's goals? And some of this will be part of the comprehensive plan as well. What is our population goal? Is our population goal incremental? Is it drastically increasing? If the population goal is to double, that's going to require some more significant infrastructure increases, not only in the roads, but in some of our larger facilities. So in short, I don't think that this CIP plan gets into that fine-grained detail, but those are some difficult decisions that I think that we have on the horizon.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think that's it for me. And last shout out for the interactive GIS map, because that is the actual underpinning of transparency, and that accessibility is awesome. So thank you for spearheading that.
Great.
Thanks.
I would like to ask a follow-up question, actually, on what Commissioner Lee asked, which is in that TC1 area, some of those areas are woefully deficient in terms of having even sidewalks for people to use. And we may, if we're going to sort of expect people to walk and bike and take the bus and things like that, we need to have those connections. We may need to be ahead of some of the developments as they happen incrementally. And so that's maybe another way that TC1 would interface with how to prioritize some of those areas. So, some have complete sidewalks and some just don't at all. So that's another element that might be important to start thinking about as we're focusing on that as well.
I think the maps actually would help with that conversation
Yeah,
a lot.
I think so,
Not only
too.
for the areas that the Planning Commission has sort of started or sort of has on the horizon to look at, but TC1's not limited to those corridors as well. So I think that would be a welcome resource for the consideration, not only from city about, as Kayla's, not to reiterate it, but we can't do all the things we want to do. And to make those investments maybe and prioritize them in TC1 is going to come at the cost of those investments somewhere else. So those are some of the on the horizon decisions that I think we're going to have to grapple with. And I think that map would be actually a really useful tool, not only on a planning perspective, but it might even be a useful tool for us on a sort of development by development basis when we're considering those rezonings at this table.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anybody else?
This is just a clarifying question. I get stuck in ruts, and then I go do some research, and then I come back and ask a different question. So for the Michigan Transportation Funding, the Act 51, which is what I think is the apparatus that we're doing this road funding in, is that correct? So in my understanding, and this is what I would like clarification for, there doesn't seem to be any prohibition for bike infrastructure to be included in those projects when they are utilizing that funding. So I know we will get an update from you as we work through the capital plan. So as we get our next update, if you could maybe put on your horizon to sort of address that, just to help us understand where the decision-making is coming from. So if it is the case that it's just not happening because no one is advocating for it, I mean, I have a resolution out of Legislar where the Transportation Commission is asking for an allocation that is because they're taking 5% of those revenues to do some infrastructure, and they're recommending that move from 5% to 80% and then a new reallocation. So I hear transportation asking for it, and so I don't know if it helps for planning to take that up since the capital plan gets approved by planning. So just guidance on that, like what level of recommendations, because you indicated that there are 70 staffers that are looking at this and making recommendations, and then you have this sort of volunteer board that comes at the end of the process and says, but wait, you forgot our pet projects, so could you please put this in and put this in and put that in? So as you prepare your next update for us, if you could give at least me and maybe the commission some helpful handrails or or guardrails for where that feedback should come to you and how it should come to you as you do that planning, that would be extremely helpful for me so that I can direct my questions and have them ready. So more bike infrastructure, it's going to come with the road infrastructure. That's all. I don't even think I'm asking for anything special. It's just put it in when we redo the road.
Just a question on that. To put our transportation team on the spot, who aren't here, it's the easiest way to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if they have sort of a relatively ready-to-go presentation on how specifically transportation is funded, and what a lot of your questions I think are coming out of that. Transportation is a complex funding animal, and I wonder if that would be getting too far in the weeds for the commission, or if you would appreciate sort of an overview of the Michigan Transportation Fund, Act 51, the road bond, like a lot of these questions that we seem to be spending, and that's something that happens on a lot of petitions, is we're particularly interested in multimodal transportation opportunities, non-motorized and bike. I dare say there might be more interest in the intricacies of that than there are water and sewer funding. And so not something you have to address now, but if that's something that would be of interest to the Planning Commission, we could schedule just sort of a bit of a tutorial on transportation funding, and that might be a good forum to dive into some of those questions outside of the CIP process, so that when the next time comes around, we've armed you, if you will, with some of those constraints that do or don't exist for the plan itself.
I'll speak for myself personally. Yes, and that could also just come in a presentation. So it could be a 5-slide deck that just says, here's how it works, because there's some confusion for me whether these bonds are bonds that go before the voters, or if these are bonds that come out of Act 51. And I think the reason why I am interested in it at this juncture is this plan sits at this table. So we approve this plan, and so understanding why in our infrastructure conversations we're not including bike infrastructure is a helpful clarification. And is that because these funds prohibit us from doing that when we do the road, or is there some other policy decision? So as you think about who you might ask to prepare that information pack, if they could address whether this is a restriction of the funding source, if this is a restriction of the policy makers, or if it's just the way we have done things, because in my view, we over prioritize car-based infrastructure and not multimodal infrastructure within our city. And it's reflected in our money, right? That saying that goes, if you want to see what someone or something values, look at where the money is. And if I'm looking at the money, we really value car infrastructure. We don't value bike infrastructure. And this budget reflects that. And I just want to understand where the genesis of that is. Is that a policy decision? Is that a funding restriction? Or is it just the way we've approached this?
Well, I will start with that resource, and then if there's a desire to dive more into it, we can always follow up with that.
Thank you, Ms. Leonard.
If I could add one just additional note that may or may not be helpful, but in regard to whether the conversation is happening about active transportation infrastructure along with street construction, it absolutely is. And you look in the project scopes, I hope that you'll see it more visible in this CIP. As I mentioned in the policy overview, this is the first full CIP that's happened since the new Moving Together Towards Vision Zero transportation plan. And as all of the project scopes were reviewed and updated in this CIP cycle, revisions were made consistently to reflect what is noted as needed in the transportation plan. So if it's a street that's noted as an all ages and abilities network, if it's a tier 1 or tier 2 safety corridor, if it was a priority intersection or a focus intersection, all of that is reflected in the scope. So that doesn't necessarily answer your question about how it will be funded, but the need, the opening the conversation to note that when you go and do this road resurfacing, let's not just put down smooth pavement, but let's do what's needed for people walking, people biking, people using other modes of transportation. That is, a conscious effort at least was made to reflect that in these scopes, with transportation staff alongside engineering staff contributing to that. So, thank you.
I have one other question, and this is a little bit sort of big picture and maybe not right now, but I'm just wondering, as remote work has become more and more of a kind of standard with the city, if there's been any reevaluation of the use of city-owned property for offices that don't have a lot of people in them anymore, in terms of, I mean, this building, it seems to me, is mostly empty a lot of the time now. And I'm just wondering if that conversation has started, and it wouldn't be something that, you know, is necessarily reflected in what's coming in the next year or two, but 2029, I don't know, maybe we should be thinking about kind of what, and it's hard to know kind of how those patterns may stick or not, but it's just something that we're heating these spaces, we're have lights on in these spaces, we're, you know, we have a lot of resources that we've invested in that have been consistently filled with people for a long time, but life has really changed too. So I'm just curious if that conversation has begun.
Yeah, I'll start. I don't know if this has been part of the CIP, but I can just share what I've heard. And over the past segment, there's been quite a bit of flexibility provided to managers to make that decision about what's the best arrangement for the type of service that they're providing, with an emphasis on that service. So in the case of planning, we are largely fully remote. I was really happy with how we transitioned to keep our services when COVID hit. And so we have maintained that. Recently, the city administrator, and sort of sharing with an all employees overview, as he frequently does, is that his intention is to continue providing that flexibility to city staff indefinitely. Again, that could change, but that he has shared that he sees the benefit of that. And I take that as a bit of a next step towards having that discussion, because I do think that that was probably a bit of a barrier from me making any sort of permanent decisions about my space without the assurance that as an organization it's going to be welcome. So I don't think that those decisions have been made, but I would anticipate now with that directive, I could see that coming. So, and then I don't know if it was addressed more specifically in your work.
It did not come up in the CIP discussions about city-owned buildings, so it could be something for the next CIP cycle, something yet to come.
Okay, thanks. Any other discussion? I think then we are ready for a vote.
All right. With the saving of Commissioner Clark joining us, we do have 6 commissioners to be able to take action. Commissioner Mills.
Yes.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner White.
Yes.
The CIP is approved. Thank you, Kayla.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, we are on to item 8B, which is the adoption of the 2023 through 2028 Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan, or the PROS Plan. Do we have a?
Just give me one moment to.
Yeah. Got to hold yourself back for a little bit. You'll come first, though, when I.
Got it.
Okay, I am promoting 3 representatives from City Parks and Recreation staff, one of which you already had the pleasure from hearing from, the Parks Manager, Josh Landefeld. I think he'll be kicking off the discussion. And then we have 2 park planners who we have a special affinity for on the planning team because they have planner in their title, Hillary Hansel and Adam Furcho. I think as has been summarized already, this is a proposed amendment to the city's comprehensive plan, updating the PROS, the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Plan, that is adopted for a defined period. You are going to hear an overview of that plan, the significant community engagement that went into its creation, and you're also going to hear some modifications to the plan that were made by the Parks and Recreation Advisory, the Parks Advisory Commission yesterday. I ask for the Planning Commission's patience as those changes are described. I think they're pretty moderate, but the proposed motion that you'll be considering this evening would be incorporating those changes. The reason for some of these rapid fire changes is that we are trying to meet a state designated deadline to get this plan adopted and submitted. Speaking of our last item, that will open up the opportunity for some other potential financial resources to advance some of our goals. So with that, Josh, take it away.
Good. Good to talk to you again after just a couple of minutes, but want to thank you for having us here again. We'll be providing some updates on the plan that have taken place since I believe Adam spoke about the plan in late October. Just to get kind of an overcap, the last 10 months, park staff have been focusing on and working on updating the previous PROS plan that ended in 2020. Based on the current environment, the plans and the needs of the Parks Department, we have seen a great community engagement this time around. We actually saw a doubling of our survey results over prior PROS plan development. In addition, we saw a much more engaged community during the public comment section. So throughout this process, Adam, Hillary, and myself received a lot of feedback, a lot of thoughts throughout the process. As Kayla mentioned, it's kind of interesting that we're coming on the tail end of the CIP program. The newest CIP program has tried to show a more realistic view of the projects that may be started in the next few years. And with that, Parks has a budget, if you notice, of over $42 million of projects. With that total, that doesn't touch on all of the wants and needs and unknowns that Parks may have. So we really have a horizon issue coming with a large number of infrastructure, facilities, programming, opportunities that we need to be aware of. And so as we look through this PROS plan and we receive the feedback from the community, from staff, from Planning Commission, where we were here back in the summer, Parks Advisory Commission, we realized that the current plan had a large number of projects and details and information that needed to be evaluated regarding their potential completion in the next 5 years. And so we really took a hard look at what the last plan was to ensure that what we had going forward made sense for what we were looking to do. The Parks Advisory Commission is probably a little tired of seeing Hillary and Adam in front of them talking about the PROS plan. I think we've given them an update almost monthly on what we're doing, the impact that we've had, the ways that we've reached out, and they have supported the process throughout. And last night, the discussion that we had with them was wonderful, but fully they supported the new resolution with some updated language. But they have been very engaged and supported our direction that we move forward. As Brett mentioned, our goal is to get this approved this month because in order to be eligible for this year's grants, we need to submit the PROS plan by February 1st to be eligible to apply for grants on April 1st. And it's also important to remember, Parks Department has over 160 parks that serve millions of visitors each year. And this is from the pools to the border to the farmer's market. And each of those parks and facilities have extreme needs that are going to be coming to fruition in these next few years. And PAC and park staff work really hard to prioritize what those needs are and what support those parks received in this document. Some parks have very active adopters, park stewards, have coalitions or commissions that really advocate for them. but it's our job throughout the pros plan to look at the department as a whole and identify what is needed to ensure that each of those parks can thrive and survive in the next 5 years. So I was asked to make a brief introduction, and I'm probably longer than I should have been, but I'm going to turn it over now to Hillary to talk a little bit further about what changes have taken place and what we're kind of doing at this point. So thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen and hear me okay. So we're back here today to talk about the PROS plan. I'm going to start out here, just a brief overview. I know a lot of you have seen this already, but for anyone who might be joining us for the first time, what is the role of the PROS plan? So this is part of the city's comprehensive plan, but it's our plan for the park system. As Josh mentioned, it kind of has this focus on 5 years as well as beyond. A big part of this is the opportunity for this public forum to discuss, what is important to the community, make sure that we're reflecting the values and desires of the community, responding to current trends, and then outlining these needs and desires for both existing facilities as well as proposed future facilities. As Josh alluded to, it is something that we aim to update every 5 years to maintain grant eligibility through the DNR specifically. And so, again, just another snapshot at the community engagement that has taken place over this past year. So in addition to this, we had a PROS plan task force made up of PAC members, city council members, city staff, as well as a member from the Equitable Engagement Committee. And this task force, guided this entire effort. So everything from the development of the online survey, which had nearly 2,400 respondents, and it was open this past spring, to crafting questions and participating in focus groups with various, commissions, as well as focus groups on specific issues, including Planning Commission. And then we held 2 separate public meetings, one virtual, one in person, as well as received many email comments, mostly during this kind of, public comment period, which was a 42-day review. And so, this public comment period began, November 11th, and City Council gave approval to distribute the plan. It was passed along to other municipalities for coordination, collaboration. At this point, our vision, what we're envisioning for this public comment period is that we've had a lot of opportunities for community engagement. This is kind of seen as this last call to kind of put the finishing touches on the plan, make sure nothing was overlooked. We read and review all of the comments, take them into consideration. We're not anticipating, substantial content changes. Unfortunately, with the timing, the public comment period closed just before the holidays, so December 23rd. And there was, as there always is a large push kind of just at the end here. And so, we met with PAC yesterday, held a special meeting. They recommended their approval with these content changes that I'll show you shortly. We're here with you today. Our plan would be, if we were to be recommended for approval, to then go to City Council on the 9th, on Monday, to meet this goal of submitting to the DNR by the end of the month. And so, I know you have copies of all the public comments that we received during that public comment period, as well as basically an Excel spreadsheet that tracked kind of a summary of each comment and whether changes were made to the plan. There are also changes that were made to the plan, for other reasons. And so that was all included. And some of the themes of the public comments that we got, there was a lot of discussion around the center of the city. We did receive a statement from the Council of the Commons, as well as individual comments from members of the council and members of the community at large. They mostly focused on wanting to see census data breakdown by different planning areas within the city, which we did ultimately include. They wanted to see some stronger support, clarifying some language about funding responsibilities. There are also a couple of comments we received that were not really in support of that project. And then we received comments about including language for dark skies, compliant lighting practices within park properties. Several requests for new amenities and improvements, usually for specific amenities or improvements at specific parks from things such as neighborhood associations or other groups. And then other miscellaneous items, comments related to the Huron River Greenway plans that had been developed previously, comments relating to railroad barriers and safety issues, sustainability. So, a broad swath. And then, of course, just comments related to formatting suggestions, kind of minor clarifications with spelling and grammar. So that's kind of just an overview. And then at the Park Advisory Commission meeting yesterday, PAC recommended approval of the plan, but with the following language adjustments. These are all related to the center of the city. So the first adjustment was there were 2 paragraphs that discussed the center of the city, and they were previously included on both page 20 and page 52. The thinking was that it was duplicative and that it made more sense to include on page 52, so we removed it from page 20. We also added specific charter language, from the charter to that page 52 language. And then we also adjusted, one of the sentences there to basically state that the Council of the Commons is responsible for recommendations on design, usage, and funding for the library lane lot. Previously it said, just funding, and there are some other language changes that were recommended. So these are the main changes that PAC wanted to see and that were changed from the version that was in your packet. So the most current version is up on the park planning website with these changes, and that's what we'd be asking for you to review today. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you for reminding me of this twice, Commissioner White. We will move into the public hearing portion of this. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up to 3 minutes about the Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan for 2023 through 2028. We'll first call on individuals present to address the commission, then remote participants to speak during the public hearing remotely. Press star 9 if listening by phone, or use the raise hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name, if available, for those accessing through the web link. When you hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. For either method, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anybody present that would like to comment?
Good evening. My name is Peter Allen. I live here in Ann Arbor on Applewood Court. Thank you for an opportunity to speak. I've read the pros plan. I read the capital improvement plan more than once, and I want to use this as a quick chance to bring you up to speed on what we've been trying to do for the last 2 years with our nonprofit we created in 2019 called Equitable Ann Arbor Land Trust. I'm a developer. I taught development for 40 years at U of M. I had a number of you as students, including Lisa and Wan Wu and Kyla's fiance and Hillary Hansel. I love Ann Arbor. I know it well. I see enormous problems with our sustainability and our housing agenda. It's well verbalized by everyone saying these are problems that we have to address. You look at the 30 projects that were identified in the paper today by Ryan. The only ones that begin to talk to this problem are the ones being done by the city with the great talents of Jennifer Hall on the former Y site and the site at Catherine Fourth. Equitable Ann Arbor Land Trust has been very busy for the last 2.5 years talking to hundreds of stakeholders, most of you. We are finally ready to release our 2030 draft development plan to create 25,000 housing units on publicly owned surface parking lots, now owned by the city, the county, Washtenaw Community College, Ann Arbor Public Schools, and the university. These are surface parking lots for the most part. They clearly have a higher and better use than parking for commuters. The best immediately feasible sites in our mind are the 8 surface parking lots near the river from Argo Pond to the Arboretum. These 8 surface parking lots, half of which are along Fuller Road, the Fuller Pool lot, owned by you, the hospital lot across the street, a lot of people talk about as the train station site, and the 2 university-owned sites on either side of Fuller Road at the Mitchell Fields. We see these as ideal, mixed-use, transit-oriented, affordable workforce and market-rate housing sites. Rental and for sale, wherever possible. These 8 sites offer 10 to 20-minute walkable distances to jobs. They're near the river, they're near downtown, they're near campus. Kayla's $430 million in affordable housing is one of the many tools that we can use to bring the prices down for this housing. Publicly owned land with a community land trust, long-term 99-year leases from the current owners, so they still control the land and they create the strings attached to the type of housing to be built on them, are another very important tool. The risk to the city and the university would be zero, as an RFP process would leverage the private sector to turnkey develop these sites, subject to the underneath land remaining in the public venue, public ownership, receiving a negotiated land rent. I sent a copy of this to you all, as to many of you that I've got addresses. I look forward to getting back to you. This will be an article in Ryan Stanton is meeting with us tomorrow to talk about all the details of this, flesh out more details, and that'll be available publicly next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Larry Deck. I live at 3050 Lorraine Street. I'm speaking on behalf of Walk Bike Washtenaw, what used to be called Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition, but we wanted to make it a little easier to say. This ties in actually to what Mr. Allen was talking about in the River Valley area. The previous PROS plan had 4 maps of what was called the Huron River Greenway, the connected parks and trails in the River Valley, showing the border trail and also showing the gaps in the trails. This proposed plan took those maps out. It was in the 2016 plan, it was in previous parks plans, and it needs to be put back in. These are long-standing plans that many people have worked on over the decades, really. And some text has been put into the parks draft to try to address some of these concerns. It helps, but it doesn't deal with all the issues. And in a case like this, one picture is really worth 1,000 words to show what's needed in terms of trail connectivity. Having the maps in the plan would help with funding applications, help attract funders who are attracted to these major projects like the Border Trail and connections to it, Border Trail that being also part of the statewide Iron Belt Trail system. To take one example of what's missing currently in the plan that was in there previously is the area around the Fuller Maiden Lane intersection down the hill from the hospital and in the area of the parking lots that Mr. Allen was talking about. Most of you, or probably all of you, are too young to remember back in the 1980s when the roads and bridges in that area were rebuilt. The roads were rebuilt and widened. 4 bridges were built, 2 over the river, 2 over the railroad, and pads were built underneath each bridge, each of the 4 bridges, concrete pads for trail connections that were anticipated to be put in. Well, it's been about 40 years and those trail connections still haven't been made. That needs to be in the plan. Having those connections, both the B2B connection through there and the loop trail under the bridges would be important for mobility for walkers and bikers in that whole area of Lower Town, the University Hospital, between North Campus and Central Campus. These projects have been, they were in the transportation plan, the non-motorized transportation plan in 2016, it's in 2006, and they were as well as in the parks plan in 2016. And also they were reaffirmed by the City Council resolution in 2015. The Greenway, the Huron River Greenway, the connected trails and parks in the Valley Corridor are really the jewel of Ann Arbor's park system and need to be treated as such. a lot of work, a lot of minds and effort have gone into these over many years to help create this vision, and we need to perpetuate that vision in the plan. As far as what you can do, I don't know whether it's best to defer action on this or to act on it with a proviso that these maps be put back in the plan within, say, the next 2 months. I guess that's up to you how best to deal with it. But those maps need to be in there for a lot of reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else present here that would like to speak to the commission on the PROS plan? Anybody in the queue virtually?
We do. Caller with the phone number ending with 345. You can press star. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hi, I'm Kitty Kahn, and I live at 515 Crouse Street in the 5th Ward. I have a few things to say, but first of all, I'm assuming that the presentation that we saw on the screen for page 52 did include revisions that were made in PAC yesterday. If so, I have a comment about the change to the language on page 52 regarding center of the city. I'm a fan of the Oxford comma, but in the sentence that talks about, I don't have the exact sentence in front of me, but there was an Oxford comma in front of "and funding." It was the part about what the Council of the Commons would be responsible for, I think it was directing, design, and then at the end it said "and funding." And there was an Oxford comma in front of "and funding." And this changes the meaning. This makes it mean that the Council of the Commons is responsible for funding, and that is not true. Responsible for maybe directing, I don't have the exact sentence, but anyway, I want to make it clear, Council of the Commons is not responsible for providing the funding, so I want you to make that change on page 52, please, to reflect that. Also, I'm very happy that PAC has added the charter language for center of the city in the PROS plan. That was very good, because it should be there. And since it is now a part of the city charter as an urban central park, the library lot should join Liberty Plaza and Kemp House as being designated a park, and it should be rezoned to public land. Such a designation would make it easier to apply for grant money for the center of the city. There's been a lot of talk about the need for funding, and this would enable more funding. So I would like to see that done. Another source of financial support for the center of the city should be the DDA. After all, it is in the DDA area. This should also be added to the PROS plan. One thing that other Michigan cities with thriving public squares, such as Detroit, Plymouth, and Royal Oak, have in common is that their DDAs and their mayors are strong supporters. That should be the case in Ann Arbor as well. Why isn't it? So I would like that to be added to the PROS plan too before it is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending with 464. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hello? Oh, thank you. Linda Brower. About the PROS plan, I want to support what Larry Deck said. I don't know him personally, but I was at the Park Advisory Commission listening in yesterday when they discussed the PROS plan, and I heard him make the same comments, and I'm very much in support of that because the PROS plan does discuss opportunities for open space and recreation outside of the city boundaries. So I would love to see those maps in there. And I know that Hillary, the wonderful park planner who put so much of her heart and soul in the PROS plan, and I'm so grateful to her for doing that. She did explain why it wasn't in there, but it wasn't, I didn't quite understand why, something about them being updated, but I wondered if about them being out of date, but I wonder if an updated version could be put in. Anyway, because, you know, the Ward Reporter Trail and getting it finished, it's really important, so I totally support that. And maybe Hillary can clarify what I didn't understand last night for all of you as well as for me. And my other point about the pros plan, you know, the center of the city is mentioned in it, and I'm glad the charter amendment is in it. And since you are the planning commission and you're in charge of making recommendations about zoning, I was very surprised when really relatively recently, I thought that all city-owned land is zoned PL, public land, whether it's used for parks or for other city facilities like City Hall or the Yard or whatever, or U of M land, whatever, you know. But I thought it was all zoned PL, and I was very surprised when somebody told me that the library lot was actually zoned D1. And since the city charter says it shall be public land and parkland in perpetuity, I think it is really incumbent upon you to, as soon as possible, recommend to City Council that the official zoning be changed from D1 to PL, because as we know, DL and PL, D1 and PL have very different, very different consequences. So please consider that, and I'm bringing it up during this public hearing because maybe you can even suggest a change in the pros plan to say, the city should consider rezoning
30 more
the
seconds.
library lot. The city should consider rezoning the library lot into public land, since by charter amendment, it is public land in perpetuity. So let's have our zoning reflect our city charter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniel Adams, you can unmute and address the Planning Commission for 3 minutes.
Yeah, Daniel Adams, 1016 Daniel Street. One of the things about the plan that I think is really commendable and fully support, the change to page 105, recommending that the center of the city is a poor candidate for resource investments, until we have an established park plaza on the site. One of the things about that I think it flows naturally from the statement and earlier on page 90, I think it's 92, but it might have been repaginated in this draft, relating to the earlier park survey that was taken last year, that I think accurately measured local sentiment regarding the appetite to invest city money into the site. Quote, there was low support for developing a new downtown park at the center of the city site, which includes Liberty Plaza and the parking lot known as the library lot. I think it's a real mistake to allow a very small minority of city residents who, for whatever reason, are invested in the idea that this is a viable project at the site. It's a mistake to allow them to, shape something that becomes part of the comprehensive plan in a way that advances an agenda that really doesn't seem to be supported by city residents as reflected on the most recent survey, which, as compared to the 2018 ballot initiative, was a much better test for public sentiment in terms of whether or not to invest resources into the site. The ballot initiative set aside the property in perpetuity. There was a lot of opposition at the time to the development that was going to go in there. The ballot initiative itself, the language wasn't intended to measure public support for making city investments into the site. So I appreciate the fact that the plan, at least the draft that I'm looking at, the draft attached to the agenda, indicates that we really need to wait for Library Green, the private organization that committed to raising money to establishing a viable park plaza at the site. We need to wait for them to do the fundraising work that they committed to do, which they haven't done to date. They've broken their promises, I think, to the community.
30 more seconds.
We need to wait for them and really put the onus back on them to do what they promised to do before we invest city resources into that site. So the version of this that I'd really like to see codified into the master plan is a version that makes that very, very clear and lays down a marker such that it's abundantly clear to the folks that made those commitments that they need to follow through. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No other speakers have indicated.
Okay. I will read the motion, but it sounds like there's some things that this motion needs to cover that are amended.
No. The motion as it stands is adequate, so long as the Planning Commission is clear that you are adopting the version as modified by the Parks Advisory Commission. So if you
Okay.
have any questions about the impact of those changes from the version that was in your packet, I would just ask for you to have the park staff clarify that with you. It's just those 3 changes that were identified and summarized in that. But the motion as it stands, with your acquiescence of those changes to the plan are fine.
Okay, and that's included on the paper sheet
Correct.
that we got at our
Yep.
seats, yes. Okay, so there's 2 motions. The first is that Ann Arbor City Planning Commission adopts the 2023 through 2028 Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan as a citywide element of the Ann Arbor City Comprehensive Plan and repeals the 2016 through 2020 Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan. And the second one is the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 2023 through 2028 Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan as an element of the Ann Arbor City Comprehensive Plan. Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Mills. We are in discussion. Go ahead.
All right, so I think my first question or my clarification is to you, Hillary. You're on 2 screens, so if I'm looking back and forth, it's because one is flickering. I think I've read the exchange between you and Mr. Deck. I think I understand what I've read. I wonder if there is a compromise that could be considered. So am I correct that all of this is covered under potential new recreational facilities and park amenities starting on page 131 and subsection F, border to border trail, point 4, Fuller Road, and point 3?
Okay, let me scroll to that page. Let's see, border to border trail. Yes, yeah, so just to clarify, the maps that Mr. Deck was referencing, those were included in the last PROS plan. However, when we looked at them as part of updating this plan, we noticed that the alignment of some of the trails didn't reflect current thinking both by city staff and Washtenaw County Parks as far as like the proposed alignment for the border to border trail. And the maps just hadn't been updated to kind of reflect current conditions. So while we're not saying that everything in those maps isn't current, there were elements that hadn't been updated to reflect current changes. I will fully admit, I don't know who had specifically put those maps together originally or how old they were. And talking to my colleagues at the county parks, they thought the maps were probably close to 10 to 15 years old, and that the Huron River Greenway was this visioning effort that the border to border trail that kind of eventually turned into the border to border trail in some regards. There were also lots of connections that were proposed in addition to the border to border trail alignment as well. This plan, the PROS plan, is our parks plan, and so the fact that they were older, they hadn't been updated, it wasn't something that we were challenged specifically with updating. And the fact that it proposed trails, non-motorized connections on land that was not parkland, land even not owned by the city, or, such as private land and university land, we couldn't say that this reflected, the current thinking of the community. So essentially, we removed those. We inserted current border-to-border trail plans showing those proposed alignments that we did know to be current and reflective of current plans. I understand Mr. Deck's points that those plans aren't, don't totally replace what was included in the Huron River Greenway maps. But, without having something that was current, it didn't feel right to include those, and that's why they weren't part of this plan.
Thanks for that. So my question that I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page and I was referring to the correct content. So I wondered if there were a way, so two things then. First, the city has discussed the bikeways under the bridge because of the widening of that bridge. Do you all, where do those maps and designs sit within your purview? Do you have access to those? Are those maps and designs that you comment on, or are they outside of the parks because they're in an infrastructure project, even though they're going to connect to the trail?
I'll jump in. Yes, we've been in regular conversation with Fran and Nick in regards to that project. There was initially going to be a meeting where they will be coming to PAC to talk about the impact that and how those can be played into those trails, because you're right, they do connect. While it may end at a point that is outside of parks, they do play into a connection within there. All of these points that are in this plan and the other conversations associated with bike recreation and bike transit, I mean, those are all conversations that we are a part of. We have not had that meeting at PAC yet because engineering is working through figuring out exactly when to come at the right moment. But we have started those conversations and are engaged with them. And anything that moves forward with that plan is something that park staff, PAC, will have interaction with and say as a part of.
So I think my question is there a mechanism that's available to you and therefore us to make an addendum to the plan that references this horizon, so that you wouldn't, the concern that I'm hearing is the maps that you have are out of date, you don't know the origin of them, they don't reflect the current sort of reality on the ground. What I'm hearing from Mr. Deck and his comments, both in the email and his presentation here, is it's important to have those maps there because they help with, other activities that are happening inside the city, whether it's for funding or for grants to sort of fulfill those types of things. And I'm trying to see, is there a way that the plan can be the plan that Parks has, but has an addendum that acknowledges that this is still happening, that, the city is working on this, or a process where we would be able to amend the plan in the future. So I think that's the set of my questions. I'm just trying to understand if there is a bridge to what I'm hearing Mr. Deck ask for and what I see in these comments.
Yeah, I mean, this plan, one of the things that we have worked really hard on in putting this plan together is, as I mentioned at the start of this, right now we have $42 million of projects set aside within the CIP. There's a large number of things that we are completely unaware of what's going to be taking place. When the PROS plan was created 6 years ago, in 2016, we did not know that the West Park Band Shell the foundation was going to fall apart during this period, and the $2 million project set there. It is not a situation where this plan identifies the only things that we do in the next 5 years. The goal of having this gives us the flexibility to identify things that we are aware of and want to focus on, but also the flexibility in regards to what we need to do moving forward. The inclusion of a picture into the PROS plan is not going to determine one way or another whether or not we have the ability to do that plan that project moving forward. Our job as a staff and as the planners is to ensure ourselves that we're in the conversation and having these things in writing in regards to the Fuller Road Maiden Lane interchange, the Fuller Road rerouting the trailway using Fuller Road Park. Those are all things that are in there that are identified as ways that we're going to continue to talk about when opportunities come about. We completely understand the need to move forward with to improve the interchange of the border to border at that section. And it's in there as a way for us to support it when it comes about. I mean, as number 2 on that pile is the Barton to Vandermeer Tunnel. That has been sitting in that map for the last 10 to 15 years. And we're still working on that, and the likelihood of us completing that in time for this within this cycle is pretty good, assuming that everything comes together. So, I'm not sure. I mean, I can come one way and say I'm not sure why having the plan, the map in will hurt us in this plan, outside of the fact that there is a hard sense of it being outlined. And in regards to moving us forward with those, to include it, I think that with Center of the City, with a number of other initiatives, we have left the door open for us to be able to negotiate and to do the projects that come about when they come about, versus being tied to something that we can't, that's in this plan that we can't get out of. I know that last part probably didn't make enough sense, but we really just try to keep this vague enough to support any initiatives that come forward.
Can I ask Mr. Deck a question?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Deck, can you come back to the mic? So can you help me understand, I've read everything, I'm looking at everything. Just give me another snapshot of what I'm missing for why it's important that these maps from 2016 to 2020 show up in this plan.
It shows the whole picture. I think when you have some text, it's really hard to see what the whole picture looks like. So I think it was Frederick Law Olmsted said that, it's important to have a visual design that you can see to make people understand things and motivate people. And I think that's the case here. Some text doesn't really do justice to seeing what the whole picture looks like.
So would the inclusion of the proposal that the city is considering, because they're designing the widening of the Maiden Lane Bridge, and as a part of that, they're also looking at the connections under the bridge.
The East Medical Bridge you're talking about.
The East Medical Bridge, not Maiden Lane. I don't even know where
Which
that
is
came
part
from.
of this whole system, yeah.
Yes. Would the inclusion of that proposed work accomplish what you want, or is that still not enough?
That's one part of it, but it's not the whole thing. If you look at the, so that's one component. That's one of the 4 bridges that has a pad underneath for trail connection. So that would be 1/4 of the plan of what's been planned for a long time. But it wouldn't be the whole thing. And there's a question, like Hillary was saying, that the border-to-border current alignment is not the same as what's been planned for a long time by the city. And that's true. There's this temporary, I look at it as a temporary alignment now that goes up to a busy intersection at Fuller and Maiden Lane. People have to cross traffic and deal with turning cars. It's not what was envisioned decades ago in terms of a trail system. So what we have there now is not the defining thing. What we have planned for a long time is what we should do, and what we have currently is just an interim adaptation to make it so people can get through, but not efficiently or comfortably or safely.
So maybe my last question to you then, for clarity, is it your belief that by having that map, that detail map in there, that directs the park to realize that vision, and that's why you are advocating for that map to be there and not just the text describing the connection?
Well, I think ultimately a lot of the things on there would be implemented. Now, there are probably things that aren't practical in the foreseeable future, but things that definitely are, like completing the border-to-border trail, completing a loop under the bridges there. So those things could be done. There are a number of other proposals on those maps that are maybe a longer-term vision. For example, connection between the Arb and Gallup Park and other trails along the Huron River there are possibilities, and other bridges and so on. So I guess it depends how the plan is seen. I see that as a visionary document, and maybe some of these things could be put in as longer-term goals, and some could be for sooner implementation.
Okay.
And I imagine that the Parks Department doesn't expect everything in that document to be implemented in the next 6 years anyway. So it's a matter of prioritizing what should be done and what shouldn't.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Deck. All right, so back to park staff. Your contention is you don't want to put them in because you don't have, it's something you want to see happen, but you don't have a clear vision for making it happen, and putting it in obligates you in some way that makes the plan not accurate, and therefore you want to make sure that what you're presenting is the most accurate representation of what you're planning.
I mean, I don't believe that the maps add the value of these projects, make them any more feasible or less feasible by including the maps that are outdated, or even if they're updated with singular projects, make it any more or less feasible that they're going to take place in the future. The reason that they're there is that there's a large number of proposed trails and things that go outside of city park land and the city properties that were included on there. And what we did with the text is focus on the intersections, the key components of that document that speak to the parks and recreation's focus for that project, that vision, in the short and medium term future, as opposed to having a 12-mile long map that shows multiple proposed trails and interchanges. We focused on these 5 areas of issues that we have identified as the key ones over the last number of years in the feedback that we have received.
Okay, anything you want to add, Hillary, to that?
Yeah, I would say I don't want Mr. Deck to think that by not including this, those plans that people worked on for a long period of time completely go away or won't be used going forward. Again, it's not that they're obligating us to do those specific things. I mean, really, to us, those plans were developed a while ago, and I guess, as park staff, we hadn't updated them, and it's not something that shows kind of current thinking, and that was really the main impetus for not having them included. I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit, but that's kind of the response here. And I would also say to Mr. Deck, when I'm talking about not current alignment, it's not necessarily, the East Medical Center Drive Bridge or something. I'm thinking even more, some of the areas that Boarded Trail that hasn't been added yet westward beyond the city, the area near the tunnel that we're working on currently. And so for us to just show something that's a historical document that's a bit older just didn't make as much sense in a plan update that we're going through right now.
About this. If the city does put in the connections when that bridge, East Medical Drive Bridge, is widened, would that impact your document? So do you amend it, or do you wait till the next revision cycle and then you would include that in?
I think there's a little confusion, just that the PROS plan is typically not a physical master plan. Our PROS plan doesn't typically include a map or plan of the city with, all of the projects drawn on it. That was something that was drawn as part of this Huron River Greenway plan when that happened. But we don't it's not typical that the PROS plan has physical master plans as part of it. This was kind of a unique piece that was referenced in past PROS plans, but it wasn't something that was created by the PROS plan, to my knowledge, at least.
And to the point, I mean, as we look to move forward, I mean, the Parks Department PROS plan has a commitment to continuing to find ways to connect the border to border, these interchanges. I mean, park staff, the planners, that's all our goals, is to find better ways to make these work. And a lot of this comes to this idea of, if it's in this PROS plan, it makes for other agencies easier for them to fundraise. Center of the City has talked about that, and this has talked about, and that's important. And these projects are in our PROS plan, and they are mentioned in there as ways for us to be a part of the park system. And that is our end goal, is to provide as many different ways and as many different amenities to be there to support not only the city's desire to go after grants and fundraise and put these together, but when there's collaborations outside of the city, it's nice to have that as well. Again, I think that what we have provided gives that opportunity for both city staff and other agencies to provide an opportunity to say these are part of what we're looking to do moving forward. And the commitment to the border to border, to the bike paths within our system, is something that we're fully supportive of and believe in and regularly done. And almost every couple of years, we have additional increases to the border to border trail, where we're improving it, widening it. We're doing the tunnel at Barton to Vandermeer. There's no disconnect between park staff, this plan, and the vision of making the border to border connect all the way through town. At no point is there anything within this plan that suggests otherwise.
Thank you.
I have a question that perhaps Mr. Lee might be able to respond to, or Mr. Leonard on this one. Is part of this really belong in the transportation plan? I mean, because these are part of what is being brought up are these things within rights-of-way and our connections to parks. And I'm just wondering if that was at all part of the discussion with the transportation plan that just came out last fall with some of these things.
I'll let you go first.
Yeah,
Mr. Leonard.
so border to border I think it does serve as a transportation mode, but it also has long had a lot of origin in the Parks and Recreation system. And I think as it becomes more complete, I think its vision as a transportation route becomes more viable. And that has happened over time, but I think that both our Parks and Recreation Department, the County Parks and Recreation Department, deserve a lot of credit for the vision over time to start piecing that together. So I think that's why, and to go further out on an assumption, I think that probably a lot of the viable state funding sources for bicycle trails are recreational, not transportation. Maybe that's changing, maybe that has changed, but per the discussion with capital improvements plans, the ship moves very slowly in making that change on the statewide level about how to fund those. So I think that's probably another reason that that the border to border has traditionally resided in parks and recreation spaces.
Okay, that's helpful. And Commissioner Lee, was the border to border trail like within the transportation report too? I just can't remember. I don't know if you recall that as being part of that whole discussion that you all had in putting this together.
Sure. Are you referring to Vision Zero?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I would say that there's definitely overlap, right? Recreation and strengthening non-motorized transportation has been kind of a core focus. I'd have to look back at the report. It's been a little.
Yeah, I don't mean to put you
probably-
on the spot.
No,
Don't you
it's
remember
not-
page 52, you know?
Right. I'd have to probably look back at it based on that overlap, but I do have to give credit for, again, how much connectivity and porosity. We've talked a lot about this, about connection on the last development proposal that came forth on Duvarn and Pontiac Trail, and the porosity of non-motorized transit that it provides. So I would say, as far as, yes, there's overlap between transportation planning and obviously recreational paths, and they can act actually as, again, modes of transportation. This, again, I have also read this as well. It's unfortunate this came to us at like, what, 4:40 or something
know,
like that.
right?
So I'm trying to really get, inclusivity is obviously very, very important. I want to make sure that we don't discard, again, historical elements and really enumerate that. I've been carefully looking at the maps, but again, there's also that concern of we don't have I don't want to say that we don't have time to verify. So I am looking for some way, I'm not answering your question directly, but I'm now pivoting to Commissioner Weish's comment and Mr. Deck's comments as well. I'm trying to figure out a way, is there a way that we can still recognize kind of the vision that was shown in those maps? I'm looking at it. It is what we're talking about. Safety, porosity, strengthening non-motorized transit. So is there a way that we can kind of preserve that while not, again, slowing down again procedurally, because obviously that is important that this is straight up due by the state by February 1. I don't have an answer yet, so I'm literally just speaking out loud at this point because this was given to us kind of at the 11th hour. So no further comments, and hopefully that answers your question.
So the Moving Together Towards Vision Zero does reference the border-to-border. Both existing segments of the border-to-border and anticipated segments are identified as, those are examples of trail bike networks as part of a larger framework of local, minor, major street-oriented bicycle networks. All part of that is, Kayla and we talked about, an all ages and abilities network. So, but this, in that transportation plan, it is border to border routed. It is not specific as to this is how we are going to solve the problem. So as Mr. Landefeld was talking, it is about that same level of identifying it as a goal for the city, not identifying the solution, whether a solution was crafted some time ago in a previous document or not, but rather talking about the overall vision to achieve the connectivity, frankly, without the specific knowledge of what the right method is right now.
It seems to me that part of the issue here is, that part of the issue is kind of I guess an awareness and acknowledgement of citizen-led work in the past and how that gets incorporated and picked up into city plans, and that there probably are things about the old plan that don't make as much sense now, but there may be other parts of it that do make sense and are kind of more referred to just in the overall goals. But it does seem that it seems strange to me that there's plans that nobody knows about currently on staff in terms of big efforts that were made in the past. So that's like a larger kind of administrative issue in a way, that it seems like there should be some way to, if people have spent a lot of time on these things and there are these pads underneath these bridges, that there's some way to be able to lift up the things that still make sense, to be able to incorporate them into current plan thinking. It seems like we're kind of getting at this at a time where it makes it really difficult to be able to make any changes based on what we have in front of us. And so I guess what I would say is it seems like, based on what I'm hearing from park staff, that we're not really losing the spirit of what was being talked about. And so that feels okay to me. I guess what doesn't feel as okay to me is how do we make sure that previous visions that still seem worth preserving and have good ideas as part of them are able to find new life in continuing plans as they go. So that's, I guess, what I would just say is I don't want to stop the train, because it feels like the train really needs to leave the station if this has to be approved on February 1st. But I guess I would ask about some sort of way to be able to make sure that we can honor good work that was done, that we continue to want to be able to draw from for future planning too, so that it just makes sure that we get those things incorporated into our current thinking and future plans. That would be Mr. Leonard.
So this is a bit of a tangent, but I think this conversation is very relevant to our upcoming comprehensive plan. We have issued a request for proposal for a new comprehensive plan. A lot of work has been done in the past by citizens and volunteers and your predecessors and some of you. And this conversation that we're talking about here, I don't think Parks and Recreation is by any means trying to, they were aware of this plan that was included in the previous version of the PROS document. By no stretch of the imagination are they trying to say that that wasn't a heroic effort. I think that what they're trying to say is that for some very specific reasons, we're now recommending to you at this point not to include that document in this plan. Not because we don't agree with a lot of the visions that came out of that, but because that document includes some aspects, it has some age to it, that we didn't think it was still necessary to include that. We are going to face this conversation in a lot of realms as we look at updating the comprehensive plan. And so it's not to say that all decisions are going to be the same and that we're going to apply the same filter, but this is a challenge of planning and communities evolving. We are planning on the backs of our predecessors that put hard work into things, that the next conversation in our community might come to a very different conclusion or a different approach to the same problem. And so I guess I just, I don't hear parks saying that they weren't aware of this, that they don't respect that work. They have presented us a plan at this point that articulates the prioritization and the focus of that work without the same level of detail. And that is going to be a decision that we are going to be facing on a wide range of issues once we're talking about the comprehensive plan.
That's really helpful context, because, it's going to be hundreds of decisions probably with the comprehensive plan around things like that. So, any other comments on the PROS plan? Commissioner Mills.
I think just to put a finer point on that, particularly sometimes our planning efforts are about very specific things and drawing the lines in a particular neighborhood, and sometimes they are bigger picture, I would say. Just like staff in answering before noted that sometimes it's a physical plan and thinking about like what the thing looks like, and sometimes it's more what are I use way better language than I'm going to use here, but like kind of what are the overall needs, what are the kind of goals of what our infrastructure is, maybe that, I mean, it may not necessarily be a physical map that is part of our plan. And I think that I can absolutely see how this is going to come to be. Our current tome of documents includes very deep dives on specific areas that were really important in thinking about a corridor, but 15 years have passed. We're not going to do that same deep dive. And when there will be conflict. Things have changed in that situation. And I think that we need to be okay saying that served its purpose during the time. We may need to move on to what this is. And I just want to commend the park staff here, as we did the last time that you came before us, for all of the engagement efforts that were put into this, documenting kind of how you responded to comments, the feedback that we gave you the last time that we saw you, and the changes now that we see as a response. I really appreciate the clarification and the getting to the bottom of the 10-minute versus 20-minute neighborhood walk. So thank you for that. I just want to, I think that different planning efforts are really going to focus on kind of a different granularity. And I think we can't just keep on adding and adding and adding because then resolving the conflicts, I think, really becomes problematic and it doesn't necessarily move us forward. So I'm comfortable with where this is, and also hear feedback, certainly. But I feel like where the document arrives right now kind of balances what makes sense within a parks plan. And to this point, I actually pulled up we used to have a non-motorized transportation plan that we actually repealed when Vision Zero plan came out. Because it's not that we don't care about non-motorized, but we had a different approach now to the way that we're thinking of our transportation planning system. And so I just think I'm comfortable with kind of where we are.
Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, thank you. And to build off of that, and I think I've kind of gotten a better sense of specificity versus generalities, right? We've kind of captured the intent of really, again, connectivity, porosity, as well as systems connectivity, reading your specific words, Mr. Deck. I do feel really comfortable that over 2,300 individuals have given feedback. The process by which this has been devised and revised, looking at all of these changes tracker, does make me feel that a lot of the community has given input. And you are right that we are going to have to work to resolve certain conflicts that exist between existing conditions, updated conditions, and what the visions of the past were. So the other thing that actually gives me a lot of relief is the fact that thank you for double checking Vision Zero. Creating consistencies within documents and references between is also very important. That's going to be one of the core points of this this comprehensive plan. So I also feel comfortable in saying the general intent of this has been, I think, upheld as far as systems connectivity, and that a reference to another planning document, Vision Zero, and the B2B on a larger regional basis, to me, again, I feel comfortable with this. And again, I also commend the Parks Department here for getting the level of feedback and inclusivity and getting really addressing at the granular level of all of these different public comments. So thank you for synthesizing 2,300 plus people's comments and really making the updates necessary. So thank you.
Commissioner Sauvé.
I'll just echo that. I believe the intent is carried through with some of the bullet points that the map may be outdated in its specificity of implementation of intent, and that the intent is still carried forward just through different metrics. Speaking of intent, though, I want to go to some of the changes that were made as of yesterday and maybe discuss a little bit of the intent of the language, specifically around the on-design usage and funding for the library lane lot and the removal of the paragraph on page 20, which seems to actually repeat in that same paragraph on page 52. And what I'm referring to is maybe the specific sentence of, therefore, the City of Ann Arbor Parks and Recreation and the Parks Advisory Commission are not currently responsible for the maintenance, planning, and programming of the library lot space. And so I like to kind of like do a matching game. And so when I see funding, design, and usage, maintenance, planning, and programming, I see Center of the City as responsible for recommending design, and the Parks Department not responsible for planning. So design and planning being the correlation, usage and programming being the correlation, and then maintenance and funding maybe being the correlation, but there's no kind of correlation in terms of creation here. So one, I want to see if there was actually intent to correlate those two things, that what the Center of the City is responsible to recommend is trying to match in any way what the Parks Department is declaring not currently their responsibility. That's kind of question one. Maybe I'll pause there for you guys to respond to that piece.
Yeah, I can do my best to respond. Obviously, this piece of property following Proposal A in 2018 created a unique situation in for the Parks Department, for the city in general. the proposal A had the support, showed it as all public properties on that block being identified as parks. Since 2018, the Parks Department has taken its lead from City Council and administration on how that is handled. City Council created the Center of the City Task Force following Proposal A. It was never the center of the city, and the library lot and the library lane were not given to the Parks Advisory Commission to plan, develop, program. It was a task force was created, and from that task force, a commission for those properties was created, which is the Council of the Commons, with the direct initiative to provide recommendations to council on that space. Liberty Plaza and the Kemp House have historically and are currently park properties that have been managed, maintained, developed, improved, funded, programmed by park staff. While Council of the Commons have that ability to make recommendations on that, any recommendations from Council of the Commons should come to PAC for their approval, recommendations, or feedback. Because of the structure that is created for the library lot lane and the library lane, that does not need to take place. PAC has no responsibility, and park staff have no responsibility over that property there. The initial statements that were put forth in the pros plan kind of made that statement because it is by charter. The language is there, the language was updated, but Parks currently does not have anything to do based on the administrative structure created by council for library lane. The language that was adopted yesterday changed the original pros plan from, because the two paragraphs were exactly the same on page 20 and on page 52. The being duplicate was not desired, which is why they were moved from about 20 and from page 20 and put into 52. The original language of the first paragraph did not completely did not use the exact language from the charter, although the language was summarizing the charter language regarding the establishment of the center of the city. It didn't have in perpetuity, but for the most part, it was reworded in another way. The second paragraph was originally Council of the Commons is responsible for recommendations and funding of the library lane lot. The reason that was included originally is that currently there is a desire to have an RFP for the design of that. Council of the Commons has been charged with fundraising, finding funding for that RFP before it moves forward with the support of City Council's money that they set aside for it. Council of the Commons has felt and it has reiterated that they are not responsible for the funding of that space, which speaks to the Oxford comment earlier. However, there is a desire to include the language in the pros plan so that the Council of the Commons can work with their funding groups to find additional grant funding. So how they work together, the PAC did not identify the connection between the first part of that paragraph and the second part of that paragraph. They focused on what the concern was raised yesterday by individuals speaking about Council of the Commons in regards to that one paragraph that put Council of the Commons responsible for funding. That was the primary thing that was mentioned yesterday. This iteration seemed to speak about the 3 areas that needed to be done for Council of the Commons to move forward. Center of the city, that library lane lot. The creation that follows the RFP process, which is on hold until money is raised. And so I know that that's a long-winded answer that probably did not answer it, but I have been struggling to figure out how to convey this in a good way yesterday and today, because it is a unique situation. It is unlike any of the 160 plus parks that we have in our system, where we have a space that is identified as a park in the charter that the Park Advisory Commission does not have responsibility of.
So just to kind of, the intent of including this is to provide clarity around exactly that uniqueness.
Yeah, at this moment in time, this is a document that is as of January 4th, 2023 is the reality that we live in.
Yep. And so, that's, I just want to kind of like, everything else that we're talking about here, we're talking about ways that that PAC and the planning department can work towards improvements in projects. And there's kind of language specifically in here to recognize the uniqueness and clarify it in a transparent way that this is a thing, but this is actually not a parks thing. This is my understanding then.
It is the way that it is the way that the structure is today. Parks is working with Council of the Commons to help as they look at how to activate park staff. Hillary and Adam will be supporting with the RFP process, because our job as parks staff is to ensure that the spaces that get utilized by our residents follow a process and a procedure that is consistent, because if it does move forward with an RFP, we want to be a part of it because we want to support that, because we want to provide recreational opportunities for people in those spaces. So it is included in the pros plan because of what it may be in the future and the way that it is written in the charter as a park, but it is identified uniquely that way because it is a unique situation at this moment.
So would it actually be appropriate, where it currently says that the Parks Advisory Commission and the Parks and Recreation Department are not currently responsible for maintenance, planning, and programming, to also include that they're not responsible for funding?
Yes, Parks has not provided any funding to the library lane lot in any direct form. When asked and when things are brought forward, there is occasionally staff time associated with it, but there is no direct funding at this moment set aside for the library lane lot from Parks.
Okay. I guess in terms of, what's been surveyed, the understanding that this isn't part of Parks, I'm just going to say maybe, I'm going to offer up for discussion before I put a proposal, but that their funding is added to this list of things that PAC is not responsible for relative to center of the city, to make it very clear if the intent of including this in the pros plan is for clarification to the community about what it is and what it isn't. It would be really helpful in terms of planning and prioritization of projects and funding and effort to really articulate that. So as I read it and as I understand the intent behind it, I would want to make it really clear that there's no responsibility for funding from the PAC as well. Thanks for all the kind of clarification on that. This is just one that's been put to us in a very unique way, and where the language was leading in the proposition in terms of assumptions and the voter understanding of the intent behind it. I want to make language here very clear relative to our city hall and exactly what we do and do not intend to do relative to this project.
I'm pausing just for a second as I think on this, and so if anyone else would like to speak, I can kind of come back with a thought on that.
Well, Josh, if I could ask a quick question on that.
Yep.
Is there, what, I'm thinking that if it were very explicit in that regard, would that foreclose any funding stream possibilities? I think what you're talking about is sort of the responsibility to identify and seek. I don't know if there was something in this plan that said the city shall not participate in financial support of it.
As I read it, it's currently not responsible for maintenance, planning, programming, and then adding and funding. So the language is still currently not responsible for, but really clearly articulates that as part of the list of non-responsibilities at this time.
And I guess the question, Josh, is there any reason in which the city would participate in funding following the work of others on the other aspects?
I mean, yes. I mean, again, I think what I tried to convey, what we tried to convey is that this is at this moment. On Monday, council could make a choice and explain, could make a statement that changes some of this. And the city, and not parks, the city has provided funding for Library Lane RFP. There's been money set aside for them at different points for that. So to say the city is not there, I am more comfortable, and I know that this is a fine line, and I understand, I appreciate the question very much so, and I understand that the dichotomy of the groups that are there. I think that including funding at that point, because the reality is that one of the biggest things that this document does is it provides our staff with the language to move forward with MDNR grants. And so if there is not a connection to this unique one, I think that potentially in the 5 years, by including funding into this statement, that parks and that may change in the 5 years. And I think that including it today would impact our ability to secure funds as the city parks in the future. So and Hillary and Adam, I'm looking at you to kind of, I know that's the bigger question about the process, but in regards to the grant funding with the MDNR, that language may preclude us if things change in our community. Yeah. That may impact us, so.
I agree, Josh. I think that if we included language that we weren't responsible for funding in the future, 4 years down the road, if something changes, that could hurt us without an amendment to the pros plan itself. It seems like it could be something that come back in the future.
But I guess that's what I want to be really clear about, like why it's in here and what it's saying, because it doesn't say in perpetuity it's not going to support these things. It's saying at this current moment, these are the things it's not responsible for. To kind of put a line in the sand of like where this thing stands right now, and who's responsible and should be working on this and who shouldn't, so we can prioritize the other projects that we spent a lot of the other time discussing this evening in terms of bikes and connectivity and transportation and things like that. So, I mean, I'll take your recommendations, if you don't want to include it, but I see a lot of muddy waters around this project, and I want to make it very, very clear exactly the intent and all the kind of avenues of this language.
I do appreciate that, and sorry, I'm rereading it and pausing. I mean, I will say at the moment, I think for the uncertainty of what the future may bring with this space because of the uniqueness of it, because of the language of the charter, I think to include funding when that was not part of the conversation with the Parks Advisory Commission, I would struggle to include it at this point. You know, if this commission is encouraging of that, I think that it would be a conversation that I would have to follow up with. I think at this point, I struggle to include it because I think that that line in the sand is there, and I am not sure what the city's goals will be for it. And I think that there's an opportunity that, while it is today, and is a focus of it right now, the maintenance, the planning, and the programming are key components that I think speak to it. And because there has been funding by the city, I think that including funding, while it's not parks, is something that could be looked at differently. So I would probably lean towards not. I mean, I appreciate your statement, but I would lean towards not including it at this point, if that's acceptable by this commission.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll leave it.
Anybody else? Yeah, Commissioner Lee? We're having discussion at this point, so unless one of the commissioners wants to.
Sure. Actually, I wanted to switch gears because I know we've focused predominantly on these two. The only question I actually had, and I'll make this pretty brief, I've been looking at the planning process for the pros plan. I'm specifically looking at page 99, and it has to do with the respondents' demographic as far as rent or own. And I'm contrasting that with our census data of a total number of housing units, 53,000, owner occupied 22, and renters 26,000. So you got kind of a roughly split. And so I just wanted to kind of mention, hey, it does look like obviously renters are a little more transient, but that in the next iteration cycle of outreach, I'd love to see a little more. Even if it's transient, we do want to get the opinions of folks that may be renting, as well as kind of looking at I don't have an exact household income breakdown, but just trying to make sure that and recognize that there may be biases as to the representation of people that we get, and kind of looking through this. But again, it's not to say that we've obviously you guys have gone through rigorous things, but as I look at these kind of results relative to kind of the census data, just want to make sure that we have as equitable of a representation of, folks' voices in this plan. And again, there's nothing that I'm saying, just wanted to switch gears and just kind of point that out as, I think if we have a roughly 60-40-ish split between renters and homes, then the respondents being 86 to 13% to me was like interesting. I mean, it makes sense because again, owners have a little more kind of like vested interest in based on their permanence. But to make kind of a conscientious effort to say, hey, could we have a representative sample that is more proportional to what we see kind of in the census? Just again, kind of I know we've spent a lot of time on these other two items, but just want to switch gears and make that kind of comment. Not to say that the results or outcomes of this is by no means, I mean, we've gone through procedural outcomes. It's more of a comment on the systemic biases that may inherently exist in kind of the dynamics of, public reporting and as well as public kind of like engagement with these processes, and an intentional effort to try and bring the voices of the not necessarily heard. So just quick comment on that demographic. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay.
Sorry.
Are we ready for a vote then? I think at this point that ship has sailed, so. All righty.
All right, so this is approval of the motions as presented to adopt this as a component of the city's comprehensive plan as amended by the Parks Advisory Commission and as summarized. This would also repeal the previous version of the document. Commissioner Mills.
Yes.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Yes.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Weich.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, we are on to item number 9, which is another opportunity for public comment. Persons to speak up to 3 minutes about any issue that is on the agenda. We'll first call on individuals present to address the commission, and then remote participants to speak during this public hearing remotely. Press star 9 if listening by phone, or use the raise the hand feature if viewing through the web link. For phone access, call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 977-6634-1226. To unmute, press star 6. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand using the last 3 digits of your phone number or by name if available. For those accessing through the web link, you'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television sounds or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. For either method, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak at this time?
Just wanted to ask a question. I thought that Mr. Weich had a good question, and I didn't understand the answer. If the plan, as apparently has been approved in its current form, is it possible to amend it, say, within the next 2 months? I think that was a good question to ask, and I didn't understand the answer. Does anybody have the answer to that?
I think at this point, we're not in discussion mode anymore, but my understanding is that it's due on February 1st. So I think that's, we have approved it as proposed.
So your understanding is it cannot be amended? Is that what you're saying?
We have approved it as proposed, and it moves on to other people from us. So
The next steps for the plan will be, it can be either approved or rejected by the city council.
Right.
If it is rejected, the city council can forward it back to the planning commission for how they'd like to see it modified. And the planning commission can then consider that, consider modifications, and then re-forward it, or the city council can adopt it. After the city council adopts it, the full process would undertake again, which is multiple months. For a plan amendment, it would not be able to be done in 2 months. It has to be noticed, gone through public comment, and then repeat the process with public hearings. So in short, the next steps for this is it's either adopted in its current form as approved this evening, or it's referred back to the planning commission for modifications.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is John Wagner. I'm an architect. Recently arrived to Ann Arbor, address 111 North Ashley Street. I wanted to make a comment based on the exchange, and I want to preface that actually with the enormous advantage that I am finding that Ann Arbor has such a qualified council of planners on the commission, but also really echoing the compliments you had made to the Parks Department, impressed with the extent of that presentation and documentation. Now, with regards to this gentleman's concern about the alignment for the rail path, I think there's actually a really important observation to be made here that refers back to something that Councilor Sauvé had said earlier in this about different sources of funding through millage and the kind of disjointed nature in which funding is being categorically applied to specific scope in the city, but not thought of as comprehensive. Now, speaking anecdotally, as somebody who just arrived to Ann Arbor, it was extremely jarring to take the B2B trail to discover it sort of kind of ends at the hospital. And I was like thinking, okay, this is a huge missed opportunity, because it's clearly seeing that trail as a recreational asset to the community of Ann Arbor and more broadly to the community of Ypsilanti, but not understood as a mobility. And so, Councilor Weich, your conversation about bike paths and integration of if we're going to tear up the streets and we want to coordinate the bike path and the funding, to me it seems like such an important realization that thinking, atomizing these different topics is a very inadequate approach to these comprehensive issues of mobility and open and public space, but also how does citizens navigate throughout the city? And not to think of parks as open space solely, but also as mobility infrastructure. And, I think that there's a lot of incredible capability from the conversation that I've heard, and especially within your staff, which is really incredible for a city of Ann Arbor size to have such qualified staff. I wonder how, Councilor Lennar, in your comment that there would be a comprehensive plan upcoming, how could that vision of the interconnectedness of these assets, whether it's Liberty Park Plaza or whether it's the B2B trail, how can the vision think more holistically about all of these really great ideas that I'm hearing in this conversation? But it seems like they're completely atomized in how they're being implemented on a policy and on a funding scale. So that is my only comment. It's not really exactly a question, but really great to be here tonight and learn so much about Ann Arbor in a very few short hours. It's been really incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any remote participants?
We do. Adam Goodman, you have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Hi there, Adam Goodman, 400 Virginia Avenue. I just kind of wanted to add a bit to Larry Deck's comments at the beginning of the meeting and kind of explain to you, why this is, why you're hearing about this, why this is an issue that kind of is seen as a problem by some in the community. And that is simply that, I understand the sort of Huron River Greenway diagrams are pretty comprehensive and covered a large area. But speaking about specifically these, underpasses around Maiden Lane and Fuller, these have a habit of disappearing from city plans. And so, I don't know, the explanation from staff may be, totally on point. It may be that, this is not the right place to include, diagrams like that. And if this were a one-off, if this is it, then, I think, lots of the folks in the community would say, all right, fine, and move on. But the problem is that we sort of find ourselves with a little bit of a lack of trust here because, Larry mentioned that in 2015, the goal to build these paths was reaffirmed by a city council resolution. Well, as I recall, the reason that resolution happened is that the city had basically just proposed to drop these projects entirely off of the CIP, have them just disappear, right? And so, what you need to understand is that it feels like this is happening again. Maybe that's not true, but it feels like that, okay? And it feels like the city has this sort of, shiny object syndrome. We spent all this time and money building a whole, on the scale of $100 million plan for a whole other trail when we haven't gotten around to finishing the one that, we already have most of, but, there's a couple places where it's really not what it should be. And this intersection is one of them. It's really dangerous. It's the place in Ann Arbor that I have most often almost been hit by cars while riding my bike.
30 more seconds.
And there's some urgency around this right now because there's this proposal to widen the East Medical Center Bridge, which will actually make this intersection even less safe than it was before. So, I just wanted to add that context for you so that you understand why people are looking askance at this particular change in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other callers?
We do. Caller with the phone number ending with 345, press *6 and address the Planning Commission.
Hi, this is Kitty Kahn again. I wasn't going to speak again, but I have to correct something that was said by one of the other public commenters who called in, Dan Adams. He persists in spreading this falsehood that money has not been raised for the center of the city. This is not true. He is spreading this falsehood all over social media, as are other people who want center of the city to fail. Money has indeed been raised by the Library Green Conservancy. The last I heard, it was more than $70,000 with more money committed. I was really hoping someone from Council of the Commons would call in to correct that falsehood, but nobody did, so I felt I had to do that. Facts do matter. Money has been raised. Money is continuing to be raised. The center of the city can succeed. It would really help if that land on the library lot was rezoned public land, because then we could get grant money from outside sources. The city would not have to give that money. There are other grants available, but they cannot be applied for unless the area is zoned public land or park land. So I once again encourage you to do whatever you can to rezone the library lot, so that would help with fundraising, and it would be so great if the mayor and the DDA would support this effort, as other cities with thriving public squares have done. We need to ask ourselves, why doesn't our mayor and our DDA do that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending with 644. And press star 6 to unmute your phone and address the Planning Commission.
My name is Kathy Boris. I live at 1726 Charlton. I'm tired of the wealthy getting special treatment. So I have two requests regarding the airport runway extension contained in the capital improvements plan that was approved by the Planning Commission earlier tonight. My first request, please, Missy Stoltz, explain how the airport runway extension will help Ann Arbor meet its 820 sustainability goals. There is a climate emergency. It was 60 degrees today. Emergency. All hands on deck, including the wealthy. My second request, I wonder whether Commissioner Weish, who often raises issues of equity during CPC meetings, has any thoughts about how this airport runway extension, which would benefit only those who own private jets, will affect Ann Arbor's equity goals. Does it send the wrong message? I think maybe it does. So in summary, please, Ms. Stoltz, and please, Commissioner Weish, consider commenting publicly on the airport runway extension that benefits only those who travel by private jet. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any other callers?
Yes. Caller with the phone number ending with 464.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Linda Brower again. Am I audible?
Yes.
You are.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't going to call in again, but what one previous speaker said during the CIP public hearing about the airport, and then what I just heard now from the previous speaker, just made me feel like I have to call in. That is so true. And I don't know if you can, before you adjourn, if you can go back and revisit your vote on the CIP and recommend that they just take away that funding for extending the airport. It is just completely in contravention to all what we tout as our values. in terms of, dealing with the climate crisis. It makes no sense. And what the previous speaker said is exactly right. It's catering to the wealthy. It's the wealthy who are going to come in on private jets for the games. We want to profit from that. We prefer corporate profits. When it's a choice between climate change and profits, we choose profits. If it's a choice between equity and profits, we choose profits. If it's a choice between, pollution and toxics and profits, we choose profits. I am tired of the hypocrisy, and I know that you guys care about climate and equity. You talk about it all the time. Please, please think about this seriously and considering going back on your vote and just recommending to council, hey, here is a chance to live up to our values. There has been much data. I've looked into it. That airport runway does not, for safety reasons, does not need to be extended. That's an excuse. That's an excuse to make money off of more corporate clients and the jet-setting people. They can take commercial jets to the Detroit airport. It's half an hour away. I used to fly for my job twice a week. It's half an hour away. We don't need it. Please do the right thing this time. And I'm sorry for getting emotional, but I'm just tired of the hypocrisy, and you've got a chance to stick by your values, and I'm begging you to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other callers?
Nope.
Okay, we are on commission proposed business, item number 10. Any? Commissioner Lee?
I'll make this really brief. I talked about this at Transportation Commission as well, but it's about accessibility as an evaluative criteria. I think we were talking about mobility as non-motorized transit being considered mobility. I really like the fact that the strategic value scorecard that they added includes user experience equity and access and mobility. So this concept of creating some level of a metric, or it's the Jonathan Levine and Joe Grange talked about this a lot at the planning school, but really looking at accessibility and the evaluation of how many people can actually get to where they're trying to get to by non-motorized transit, and using that kind of as a metric and or a, what would you call it, like an index of an essence, to really say how are we doing. So from a policy evaluation standpoint, just wanted to say, hey, from the Transportation Commission side, it is something that we're looking at, and we're trying to figure out how do we develop something. And it's good to see that at least the CIP and the Strategic Value Scorecard is actually already considering it. So just wanted to bring it to your attention that that's been something that we're discussing over there. Thanks.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right, we are on to adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Commissioner Sauvé, seconded by Commissioner Lee. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.